Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Always stuff to discuss in the world of sport. Let's start with state of origin. Queensland could not get a clean sweep. New South Wales finally showed up. It just took three games for them to show up, but they showed up. Bradman Best had a fantastic debut, scoring two tries out of the left centre position. One slight concern coming out of Origin 3 is Josh Adokar went off injured towards the end of the game with a suspected hamstring strain. So, although the Canterbury Bulldogs haven't really needed him over the last few weeks, but he's pulled up with a hamstring strain with a few minutes left. That is a concern. In other news, football news, Southend United and Reading football clubs both are facing winding up orders from HM Revenue and Customs. Southend United could go out of business. Reading, similar situation. Um, so football finance is another discussion point, but it's getting buried in the news because it's the off season and they're not Premier League clubs. So less attention is paid because Southend are in the non-league and Reading are in now going to be in League One as of next season. So less attention paid. They haven't historically been very successful clubs anyway, or on the trophy count. So not a lot of attention is being paid to two football clubs in crisis. And again, that brings up the discussion around having an independent footballing regulator. And I do think that the current system we have in place of ownership and the director's test and a whole host of other issues is just not up to standard. I think the Reading situation sums that up perfectly. They've I don't know what the FA, the Premier League, and the Football League have been doing in regards to governance, but they have been asleep at the wheel for a very, very long time. And we'll see what happens there. Then we've got the ongoing series of signings for this Saudi Super League with players just en masse at various stages in their career signing in Saudi Arabia for stupid amounts of money, absolute stupid amounts of money, which is completely distorting the transfer market. Um, and you know, there's a lot of parallels with the Chinese Super League of a few years ago. A lot of money being thrown around. The Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia owns has partial ownership of four of the clubs in the Saudi top flight. So there's a lot of eyebrows being raised surrounding the sudden willingness of Saudi Arabia to basically use their public investment fund for sporting purposes. Um, so there's that. Um, Obviously, we had the Major League Baseball London series. I felt they were okay games. They haven't converted me to being a baseball fan. I will say that. It appears that a lot of the fans in attendance were already pre-existing baseball fans. So I don't know how many new fans have been enticed to watch the games, buy tickets, buy merchandise, and feel that connection with Major League Baseball. In the Ashes, England won the third test to keep the Ashes alive, but I do think Australia still have control of the series. The Bazball theory of attacking cricket that McCullum as head coach and Stokes as captain brought in, I don't think it's sustainable to win Test series on the consistent. They did need a new fresh voice in the change room. They've got that. Obviously, the controversy surrounding the second test and how the game should be played the how to describe it the culture within the game, should we say? I mean, bearing in mind over the last couple of years, this is a sport that's been beset by scandal after scandal after scandal, um, and those issues aren't going away anytime soon. But hey, mildly entertaining on the cricketing front. That the Ashes series is still alive. We're going to circle back to the NRL because the player media boycott is continuing. Now, I've been listening to a lot of radio and podcast shows to try and get a more balanced viewpoint because the mainstream media, with Channel 9, and Fox are trying to paint the RLPA as the enemies here and paint the players as the enemies here. Whereas I think both sides are equally at fault for the direction things have been taking over the last 20 months. Um, the fact that the negotiations have lasted this long make me wonder how long Clint Newton will be in charge of the RLPA. The fact they're asking of their third independent mediator to come in, that is something that I think we need to, have some discussion about. I don't think all the players are fully united behind the course of action that has been taken. I think the fact they've got 100 points on the table to negotiate as well. The deal they've been offered is pretty decent. There are some major, as I say, sticking points that I think we can work around. Um, but the lack of player interviews at halftime and full time and pre-game don't really bother me as much. But I do think as time rolls on, I think as if no deal can be reached, we may see a strengthening of action from the RLPA. I don't think both sides have been negotiating in good faith over the last 20 months. And time is running out to come to an outcome whereby the next CBA can be agreed and we have the next period of time with stability off the field. And if you are an NRL fan, you may also follow other sports like Major League Baseball, the NHL, the NFL, the NBA in North America. They've also had these similar, CBA negotiations that have not gone well, where players in the league are at odds with each other, and that there is a lockout or a strike, and that is something that the NRLPA have not ruled out. They've threatened it earlier in this negotiation process. So we shall see, obviously, ultimately what occurs going forward. But as things currently stand, we're at an impasse. The RLPA has taken this stance. The league has basically said this is a take it or leave it offer. I don't think the NRL is going to be having too much more flexibility in regards to another offer put on the table. They may be willing to give one or two more concessions in regards to certain aspects of the deal they've got on the table. But this, it doesn't appear to be a lot of contact between the RLPA and the league since this decision has been taken by the RLPA. So we shall see what happens. Obviously, the NRL has plans to take a couple of games to Vegas next year. This could potentially derail that if agreement cannot be found. We know several teams have American money tied up in them. So the Rabbitohs and the Sea Eagles, for example, are two prime examples where there's a lot of American money and finance in those teams and organisations. The league wants to do this. It wants to increase its footprint overseas. Are the players happy with playing games overseas? There's also a plan circulating to possibly have an Origin game in New Zealand. I don't think what the RLPA want is to have consultation over such decisions, such as taking games overseas or playing Origin outside of Australia. They want to have some consultation. So we shall see what happens. There is a lot at stake because there's potential expansion on the horizon within the next year or so. The women's game's expanding. There's been a lack of promotion surrounding the women's game, if I'm being quite honest, because we can't have those interviews with players because of the media boycott. I think that's going to harm the potential of growth in the women's game. And the women's game has been fantastic in its growth. I've really enjoyed watching the women's game progress and grow over the last couple of years. I'm a big fan of the NRLW. The concern is that this ongoing dispute has the potential to massively derail the growth in that area. And, we'll see what happens, but the talks haven't resumed. but this has been dragging on now for too long. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, going forward. Back to Europe. Obviously, Wimbledon is taking place. I mean, Novak Djokovic is trying to aim for, I think, is it 5 Wimbledon titles now? He's trying to go after Pete Sampras's record, I believe, and Roger Federer's records at Wimbledon at this point. He's already overtaken um, Rafael Nadal for the most singles titles majors won. Um, it's going to be interesting to see if he can win another Wimbledon and keep adding to that open era, majors record. Also, we'll see what happens with Novak Djokovic. I probably will watch the final, to be fair. So that's going to be interesting. Um, a lot of people have asked me on previous live streams why I'm not really covering the transfer market as much and the football transfer market as much. And if I'm being brutally honest, I'm falling out of love with football and the direction it's taking. And I think what we've seen over the last couple of months with players en masse going to Saudi Arabia for silly money, I think has just summed up what's everything that's wrong with the sport. It's not the country they're going to; it's the amount of money being thrown around. It's the massive distortion in the transfer market and salaries. And we've been having this discussion even before COVID about salary caps and spending caps and financial fair play and the financial rules and the transparency and agents fees and basically the finances of the sport, the economy of the sport, because other sports have struggled since 2007, 2008 when the financial crash started to hamper financial institutions around the world. Sport was impacted. Football, for some reason, doesn't seem to have gone that way. The money in football is ridiculous. It is an overinflated industry, basically, is the best way to describe it. It is overinflated. And I think a lot of agreed. Saudi money is slowly ruining the game, both football and golf. Golf, I think, is at a crossroads as well. Very much so. In regards to Ronaldo, obviously, is like, okay, he's getting a paycheck. There's a few other high-profile players have gone over to Saudi Arabia in the past, but not on Ronaldo's level. But the avalanche of a pretty decent European and South American talent suddenly going there is a bit of an eyebrow raiser. And because the Public Investment Fund has a controlling stake in Newcastle United, eyebrows are being raised about the integrity of this. Would people be complaining if Norway, who also have a public investment fund, a sovereign wealth fund, would people be complaining if, let's say, the Norwegians were like, we need to diversify our economy a little bit. We have a sovereign wealth fund. Let's invest in sports and entertainment. I don't think there will be the same eyebrows raised, especially on the sports side of things, because Norway has a sporting pedigree. Norway is a very, very uncorrupt country where finances are very, very transparent. Comes very, very highly on the corruption index as in being one of the least corrupt countries in the world. Democratic. Human rights are enshrined in law. The only issue that Norway seems to have is its whaling policy. So, Greenpeace don't particularly like Norway's stance on whaling and seal hunting and stuff, which goes back a very, very long way. But otherwise, Norway's a pretty pleasant place to live. It's one of the happiest countries in the world. Has a sovereign wealth fund. A lot of countries have a sovereign wealth fund. I mean, a lot of football fans don't like the American money, the North American money in the game from the US and Canada. And the US, again, there's some eyebrows raised by some of the social and political decisions the US have made, both domestically and overseas. We can all agree on that. But I do think the amount of money, I've got nothing against a country using its sovereign wealth fund to diversify its economy by investing in other economies and investing in other industries. I have no issue with that. But I also see the hypocrisy of people going, "Oh, Saudi money," when they weren't complaining about F1 going to Qatar and Bahrain and MotoGP going there. They weren't complaining about Abu Dhabi and the UAE when they started to buy into football and motorsport as well. They weren't complaining about some of the other Gulf states. Suddenly, Saudi Arabia is not the flavour of the month. I mean, there is some hypocrisy from Amnesty International. There is some hypocrisy from sports fans and journalists. The Qatar World Cup, I think, is the turning point, especially over more recent years building up to that tournament, in regards to the human rights abuses and the workers' conditions and the corruption behind getting that tournament. I think that was the turning point, and this is in the aftermath of the FIFA corruption scandal and the levels of almost insidious the levels of corruption within football's highest governing body. That's also seeped down to the more regional governing bodies. So, and again, I think that was the turning point. In the last 7, 8 years, there has been a turning point, but the Arab money, the Gulf money, was already invested, and they were starting to invest in smaller percentages. It's just in more recent times, especially since COVID, there's been an explosion with these Gulf nations really pumping money into sports and entertainment and tourist industries. So tertiary sector industries, we say, sports and entertainment. They've bought the boxing, the golf. They want to get pro wrestling out. I mean, I don't know how pro wrestling can do it because of the female wrestlers. I don't know how comfortable female athletes would feel appearing in the Middle East in a sporting event, considering that their human rights and the laws surrounding women and what they can and can't do are significantly restricted in comparison to men. And then you look at some of the football clubs and the amount of gambling money tied up in them. How does that work? That's got to be a major issue. But the golf side of things, that's been a very messy period for the sport. No one side has covered themselves in glory. There's been a lot of hypocrisy. There's been a lot of double standards. I think it's turned off a lot of golf fans. I think a lot of golf fans have switched off the sport or are quite disgusted with the sport. They're more likely to go down to their local golf club and go on the driving range and play with their mates rather than sit and watch Sky Sports or BT Sport, whatever sports channel is showing it and want to feel invested. I think a lot of golf fans are very, very angry with both the PGA and LIV and a lot of the high profile players and their actions over the last 12 to 18 months. So there is that. Obviously, I've now got my Netflix subscription. I've got the base package, so there are some sports documentaries like Drive to Survive. I'm not interested in that kind of stuff. I've been following the Island Games in Guernsey's Angle, Yinsmon or Angle, so you're doing okay. A few medals in the semi-finals. Yeah, I think these more niche regional sporting events, I think need to have a little bit more media coverage. But we were discussing it earlier. I don't think a lot of people globally would know about the Island Games. And this is where sports organisers have got to strike a balance between, making sure that they can organise the event and be profitable, and also organise where the athletes stay, their accommodation, their training facilities. And it's very expensive to host an event, even on something as small as the Island Games. The island of Guernsey, the Channel Islands as a whole, have probably invested a lot of money in something as what the Commonwealth or the Olympics will be massive compared to this, but they've obviously invested a lot of money at a time when money is very hard to come by, and organising events like this is exceptionally expensive. Operating costs have gone up. They've got to pay the staffing costs for all the they've got to rely heavily on volunteers to do the volunteering. Yeah, this is the problem: is trying to grow. But a lot of this is, I think, the modern concept of sport, and obviously back in the day, this would have been fully amateurs like the Olympics used to be, and it's more of the community aspect of it. But a lot of these athletes involved will be professional athletes outside of this competition. They will have competed at Olympics and Commonwealth Games and World Championships and in professional sporting leagues if they're playing team sports. So I think the problem is the media attention in regards to sport is elsewhere right now, with Wimbledon being a major thing, the Women's FIFA World Cup starting in just over a week's time. You've got the build up to the Rugby Union World Cup. There is a lot of other major sporting events that are much, much bigger, where the national and global media are far more interested in than some small, niche, regional, semi-pro sporting competition. But yeah, sports events and hosting big events like this, and I would class this as a big event for the Channel Islands, are very, very expensive. And this is coming at a time when there isn't a lot of money floating around to host events like this, organise events like this, and I'm assuming the event organisers are hoping enough tourists and locals will spend enough money to make it profitable for them to go, right, we've actually made a profit on this, because we've seen this now with Olympic Games where host cities are, and host nations are left bankrupt. Greece being the example. Um, yeah, I know what the criteria is. We've discussed this before, but I do think that um, operating costs are not considered when sports fans are looking at. Let's talk about what's happening with Reading Football Club. Unless you are a hardcore Reading fan, your average sports fan will not realise the operating costs surrounding running a sports team. That's the stadium, that's the training ground, that's the non-playing staff, that's the playing group, the coaching staff, administration staff, all the way down to the tea lady who's at the training ground, all the way up to the boardroom, and a lot of people I don't think realise the operating costs, and that's 24/7 all year round. An event like this only lasts for a couple of weeks. What you will have is a bidding process, or they'll rotate who is the host location. In this case, it's Guernsey. And then they've got a planning phase where they've got to go, right, okay, let's plan where we're going to host the events. Uh, do we have to get temporary grandstands? Do we have to have road closures? Do we have to have overspill parking for like transportation? Where are the athletes going to be staying? Do we have enough hotel space? Do we have to open up, temporary accommodation? That kind of thing, and that costs money. Costs money. Then they've got to work out, okay, how many tickets can we sell? How do we promote ourselves? Well, that costs money when you have to advertise. And advertising costs have gone up to recoup losses where companies are reducing their advertising budgets. So advertisers, those companies like WPP, for example, who make the adverts in newspapers and billboards and that area, then there's a whole range. Yeah, yeah. There's costs in surrounding sporting events. Yes, I did see England winning the under 21s. Again, the youth system over the last 10 to 15 years is starting to produce really, really good results, which is one of the reasons why Gareth Southgate is the England senior manager right now, is because of that youth program that was in place for a long time. I think we'll have to see how this group of players and the group of players below them, and those players that have played in the system over the last couple of years, how they continue to progress. But there's going to be a lot of focus on Southgate going into next year's Euros. Obviously, should qualify. Obviously, that hasn't been confirmed yet, but there's. I think it depends on the culture in the country. Not enough of our younger players are getting a first team football or even reserve football, because the reserve doesn't exist anymore in this country because of squad rule changes that the FA brought in after the financial crash. Ironically, they reduced senior squad sizes. Um, a lot of reason why in the modern day fans don't put a lot of attention on the under 21s is there's not enough of them getting into first team squads. We don't have the reserve squads anymore. Um, so there's less attention now than what there was 25, 30 years ago. There was more emphasis on growing on clubs producing their own talent and bringing players through from their academy, through their system into their first team. And Manchester United historically are very, very good at that. More recent times hasn't proven the case, but I think 50% of players to ever play for Manchester United at some point have been a youth player at the club that they have developed. So some clubs have a very, very good youth policy. Other clubs have struggled to recruit and produce the talent. But no, there's people don't have much interest. It's not well promoted by the mainstream sports media. It's not well covered by the mainstream sports media. Never has been, at least in my lifetime that I'm aware of. Um, if it is on, uh, you know, live broadcast, you've got to dig for it on the TV listings or on the internet streams. You've really got to find it. Um, yeah, it's that time of year where I start to I wouldn't say produce this. I sort of start to feel a little bit fatigued when it comes to the sporting side of things. I know obviously the NRL, the NRLW will be going, but and Challenge Cup final and rugby league's still a thing. But I'm starting to feel that sporting fatigue at this time of year. It's just the middle of July. It's 12th of July. Like people don't realise we are in the middle of July already. So I completely understand feeling that fatigue um, and that. uh, I wouldn't say. Oh, I mean, obviously, I love my sport, but even I have a point where I'm going. This is just mentally fatiguing. Um, Probably why I've been watching Netflix the last couple of days. I thought I need a little bit of a break from just sports content. Well, I was planning to do a lot of sports history videos, but I just need a little bit of a break from sports content just for a day or two, because it does start mentally tiring. It is very mentally tiring, which is why a lot of respect for those full time YouTubers who do this day in day out, 4 or 5 videos a day, churn out the content. It's got to be mentally draining to do that. Um, yeah, I think I've completely tuned out of the transfer market. I know the football transfer market is the reason why this channel is in the format it is today, with Neymar and him moving from Barcelona to PSG for, again, ridiculous money back in the day. But in my opinion, I think a lot of it is more speculation and therefore clickbait. Um, I may do one or two transfer videos if I think, like Harry Kane, if he leaves Tottenham, I think that might actually be quite big news, to be fair, because Tottenham, if Harry Kane leaves, they're even less likely to win a trophy, I think, honestly, because that is your vice captains, one of your senior players in a leadership position. You've got the new manager in, Postecoglou, who ha- has obviously got his style of football, his ideas, um, and I think, is the first Australian to manage in the Premier League. He's not the first Australian manager we've had in English football, because that will be Harry Kewell, but he's the first Australian to manage in the Premier League. That'll be interesting. Mbappe again. A lot of these players fleeing to Saudi Arabia, I do honestly think that the player agents have realised UEFA are being deadly serious with their new spending rules. I think the clubs have realised we have got to cut our expenditure. PSG even admitted we need to have more homegrown talent. We need to cut the expenditure. We need to cut our wage bill. Um, so even the clubs with bottomless pits of cash have realised we need to be a bit more careful with our spending. I think the Man City investigation that's ongoing, and their financial dealings, PSG's issues that they've had as well, have highlighted, have been the footballing authorities are finally starting to clamp down on the spending. Um, I think the new spending rules are actually having the desired impact on clubs. They are suddenly drastically going, okay, no, we've got to cut the spending, and the mass exodus of players. I think once the spending cap comes in, and the scaled system and all that, I do think we'll see a less of an exodus over to Saudi. I do. I think once the clubs have stabilised to the new financial rules that UEFA want to bring in to sort of replace financial fair play, I think we will see less players buggering off to Saudi Arabia. Um, but it's all happened very, very quickly. The new spending rules coming in a year's time. Some of these players still have time left on their contracts, so the timing is very, very interesting. Let's just say that. And some agents have clearly made a lot of money out of this, a lot of money. But the transfer market, in my opinion, is not transparent, very dodgy, not clear, deliberately complicated. So there's that. Oh yeah, Djokovic has complained about the scheduling at Wimbledon. Look, the weather this year has not been as nice as last year. Well, not as nice. The weather last year was dangerous heat-wise. This time last year, the country was on fire. I seem to remember. Parts of East London were burning this time last year. So the heat it's significantly cooler. I think the main heat wave we're going to have is going to be at the end of the month, beginning of August, is when we're going to have similar temperatures to what we had last year. Um, In regards to Djokovic playing, he's not the only player to have raised the odd eyebrow around uh, how they are scheduling Wimbledon. They've now dropped that bye week, that Sunday off. They've now basically just played consistently now. Um, I think the reason why there's an 11 p.m. curfew is transportation. Have you tried to get transport around London late at night? I mean, I went up to see a few friends up in Maidenhead the other day, which is on the Paddington line out of London, in between London and Reading. And if I'd left 2 hours later, I'd have had to wait at my interchange station for 2 hours for a train home. Because where I live, the local train station, after 8:30 p.m., there is not another train to stop there till about 10:30 to 11 p.m. So I can see why there's that 11 p.m. curfew, the 11 p.m. cut-off. Transportation, you want to get tens of thousands of people out of a major sporting venue safely. Transport around, we don't have a full 24-hour transport network in this country. Uh, 21st century, I'm surprised we don't, but the trade unions kick off and the operators it's, should they start earlier? Again, have you tried morning rush hour in London to get in? I mean, the infrastructure network, well, Wimbledon has an underground and a mainline station, great bus routes. Um, have you tried to travel around London in rush hour? It is not a pleasant experience. Like any major city, it's a horrible experience unless you've got all day to do it. Um, yeah, Djokovic is throwing his toys out the pram even though he's winning. I mean, he never seems to be happy with anything. I'm not a fan of Djokovic, but there's a lot of great champions like come across as great people. Just because you're good at something doesn't mean you're a good person or a likable character. I'm just going to put that out there. But when you've got the tournament favourite questioning how they're, I would say, scheduling or fixturing matches and start times and finish times, we have seen players are fitter. In the top 100, players are fitter. We've seen some of the longest matches in history played at Wimbledon in the last 10 to 15 years. We've seen, you know, the fact that they've now got the roofs on two of the court one centre court means, yeah, you can get more matches played when there's bad weather or bad light. But I think a lot of it to do is Wimbledon have got to work. The organisers, the Lawn Tennis Association, have got to work with their transport partners, be it public or private transportation. Because let's say court number one, centre court, have got two games that are going really late. I mean, they can seat 20,000, 25,000 people between the two courts. That's a lot of people to get in and out of Wimbledon safely. There's the security aspect, there's the transportation aspect. So there is that. Look, Djokovic is controversial. Agassi was controversial. Agassi, though, was a bit more of a crazy one, but McEnroe was, Connors. There's been a handful of champions that haven't been overly popular with not just Wimbledon, but in all the majors with the fan base. And as time has gone on, Djokovic has become less popular with the fans. Now, I mean, Nick Kyrgios, for example, he's the other bad boy. He's got this bad boy image. I haven't watched any of it so far. Tennis, much like football, I've tuned out of certain sports. If I'm honest, I've tuned out certain sports. There's only as a kid, it was different. I think I definitely enjoyed um, watching tennis more when I was younger. As time has gone on, I've enjoyed it less. I don't. I can't put a thing going. This is the reason why I enjoy it less. I can't. Um, we've seen obviously some great moments at Wimbledon and at Roland Garros and some Titanic matches and some great moments. Um, But it is what it is. Andy Murray with his injuries. I mean, look, the fact he's still playing after basically having a hip replacement is ridiculous. There's a couple of rugby league players and ice hockey players who had the same surgery. You normally, if you're at that age in your 20s to 30s, because that's the age bracket that we're looking at. So our generation, basically, if you've had that kind of surgery, you've basically come out of a road traffic collision, and you've been either in a car or on a motorcycle that's had a very, very serious collision. The surgery he has had is akin to basically someone who's just survived coming off a motorcycle at about 100 miles an hour and landing on their hip. That's basically the surgery he's had, is a hip resurfacing replacement. He's got metal in his leg, basically, in his hip joint. Why he carries on? Um, the fear of retirement. I think the thing is, his brother's older and still playing. Um, he still feels that he can go on that little bit further. Nadal said next year is the end for him, but I wouldn't be surprised if he goes earlier than he anticipates. I mean, he's got an ankle problem that is going to get worse, and he's going to have to require multiple surgeries, and he will be also limping around. Why they carry on? I don't know. They've earned enough money to retire now. They never have to work ever again. They've got enough investments and sponsors, and they've got enough commercial gigs to. But this is all they've ever known is professional tennis. This is part of the problem. I don't think they're fully prepared for retirement. I don't think they're fully. This is where we have to look at some professional sports and go, are they actually looking after the athletes when they retire? Are they, even though it's an individualistic sport, and then you've got his agent and his advisors and all that. Um, um, what would you do if you were Djokovic? Well, Djokovic has had his injury problems as well, and there is a lot of up and coming players that are really well. The old order is ending. Federer's gone, Nadal's going, Murray's on the way out. Wawrinka's not the player he was. Djokovic is the last of that last. Del Potro's gone. So the players that have basically won all the majors until 2018, 2019, only one of them is still playing at the top level, as in every major, apart from when he didn't have his COVID vaccine in Australia. So Djokovic is the guy who's had injuries, but is in better shape than the rest of his competitors of his era of tennis, of his generation. The guys in their 30s. Um, as long as he can stay fit and doesn't have any other issues in regards to visas for US and Australia and too much controversy, yeah, he could win a lot. And when we were kids, early 30s, he retired. Well, um, one thing I've noticed is there was a period in professional sport where, yeah, you got to your early mid 30s and you were a professional athlete and you were done. And then the 90s to, I'm going to say about 8, 10 years ago, a lot more high profile professionals in the team sports, especially, were going into their late 30s and 40s, and they still are. But there's been a massive trend lately, especially with sports like rugby league and ice hockey, to get younger and faster, and the game's sped up as a result. Rugby league is at the fastest I've ever seen it played. The speed of the game. Ice hockey, again, the speed of the game and the fitness of the players is the best I've ever seen. So the actual speed and pace and physicality is also just as brutal, but the actual speed of play, and older players are, unless they're super fit and very good positionally, they're exposed. So we are now seeing an average age of professional athletes drop. I think it's been the fastest drop. It's been in the last 5 years, 5, 6 years. There's been a very noticeable drop with the average age of an international squad at a tournament. I think we've seen the youngest England squad at a tournament, for example, at the Euros. Um, oh look, Djokovic and Wawrinka in their late 30s. That it is ridiculous. They're both Grand Slam champions. You know, that is ridiculous. Um, I don't think that's the oldest ever match at Wimbledon for combined age, but it's got to be up there. but their era is coming to an end. Um, I don't know how much longer Djokovic goes. Oh look, Wawrinka's a damn good player. He's a damn good player. He's the second most successful Swiss player of all time. Um, just there's a certain other Swiss player who's a little bit better, and that's called Roger Federer. But that's the problem. He was Roger Federer's understudy, basically. He was overshadowed by a slightly better player who that slightly better. But he's a multiple slam champion. And people go, oh, you know, he's not very. People slag off that Wawrinka. He's a multiple slam champion. He's won it. He's won more than one Grand Slam. So, um, yeah, I think he'll be fondly remembered by his fans and those who like an underdog. If you compare the era he's played in, but I think when this era is done, I think it's going to be an absolute free for all. Honestly, I do think it's going to be an absolute free for all going forward. I don't think Djokovic can continue to dominate for much longer. He's 3 years older than me, 2.5 years older than me. Oh yeah, if you've beaten Djokovic and Nadal, you're a damn good player. Let's be honest. They're the two best players of all time for Grand Slams. One, if you can beat them in a Grand Slam final, you're a good player. Um, but I do think when Djokovic is done, it's going to be a free for all in the Grand Slams. There's going to be champions all over the place, which I think is actually better for tennis as the brand. That it's going to suddenly become really, really competitive, and there's going to be Grand Slams going all over the place. Um, we've got uh, some good players coming through. Oh, but to me, I think because of that dominated era by just a handful of players, I think that's slowly just my enjoyment of it has gone. Um, because only a handful of players. Whereas in golf, there's a lot of players winning the majors, and we can debate the pros and cons with golf, as we've seen with the LIV PGA division. But at least in golf, many players are winning majors, whereas in tennis, a handful of players are winning the big stuff. So that's something to consider. Is well, it is what it is. But there are some good young players out there, so I think the future is bright for tennis in the next 10 years. It is. Let's just say we're not going to see the likes of Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic ever again. And just imagine if Murray's been to a lot of finals, even though he didn't win them all. And so is Wawrinka. I mean, we're not going to see the likes of these players ever again. Um, I wouldn't say they've been poor. I just think a lot of players have gone. Is there actually a pathway to success? Is it worth being professional? There are issues with professional tennis outside the top 100, and there's a lot of professional players contesting very limited prize money. Um, I wouldn't say the 90s born players have been bad. There have been a few Grand Slam champions from them born in the 90s era, but I think the growth of the sport has outstripped the money the sport has. And I wouldn't say they've been poor. I do think that tennis does have structural issues that aren't too dissimilar to golf. Um, and you know, there's only it's a difficult one, but I think tennis is at a crossroads. Um, yeah, but I'm struggling to think of more disliked champions. I think McEnroe and Connors were both disliked. They were both American, which didn't help. In the 70s, 80s, and 90s, they were very popular with a lot of fans. Andre Agassi was a bit divisive, but he was more of a character than anything else. Um, but I do think we are at that moment where Nadal's Nadal wasn't not always well liked, but people grew to like him. Um, Federer was always, polite, respectful, and the ultimate gentleman. But Wawrinka and Murray as the second tier, they had their moments as well, where they were some of the best in the world for their little period. So yeah, you got the big three and then the next two. But Del Potro, he was playing on one knee for half his career, and he managed to win a Grand Slam on one leg. which is ridiculous. Imagine if he stayed fully fit, he would have won more. Um, well, as I said, I think there was I don't know what it is, but from the 90s through to not that long ago, um, there was a lot of pro athletes that have gone longer. Um, Fitness has improved, diet, training, um, sports science has come a long way. They haven't gone too far. Um, you look at team sports, and they are starting to realise younger is sometimes better. Um, and so we'll see, like, if there is a turning point where careers start to get short again. Because an injury can end a career. It doesn't matter how good the sports science is or how many hip resurfacing operations you have. Um, there are some surgeries and injuries where the chances of resuming your career at any level are slim to none. The fact that Murray's playing again, he shouldn't be. Um, let's be honest. There's a couple of ice hockey players who've just retired because of the same surgery. There's a couple of rugby league players who have not been the same because of the same surgery. Um, so we'll see what happens. But we are starting to see a trend now of champions getting younger, professional sports teams, the average age getting younger, um, which means lots of younger players, more mistakes, more entertainment, uh, maybe less quality, but that more entertainment where you've just got players making mistakes all over the place, more open games or matches or tournaments. So, Murray said Murray's motivation. He's just going through the motions at this point. Um, is he prepared for retirement? Is he trying to put it off as long as possible? But at some point, he's got to look at his own well-being, and welfare and health, because having a surgery that serious, even though he's in his 30s, he's going to have more surgeries down the line when he's, in his 40s, his 50s, his 60s. He's going to have a lot of metal in him, and ceramic, fiber, whatever they make, you know, the various prosthetic hips out of these. He's going to have a lot of surgery in his lifetime. But yeah, I don't. Andy Murray made a press. Was it one of his press conferences where he was like, my motivation? He just, yeah, I don't understand why players like Nadal and Murray are still trying to, push themselves when clearly their bodies have given up, and their health has got to come first. They've won it. They've got enough money behind them. They've both been world number one. They both won. Look at, Nadal. He's got the French Open Grand Slam records. You know, um, Murray obviously winning three Grand Slams broke a very long drought that we'd had for a very, very long time. And then Raducanu comes along and goes, I'll do it for the women as well. So, you know, I think he's got a young family. I think he's got money in the bank. He's obviously he looks broken as a player. As a human being, I'm sure, like, he could be a very good coach, a very good commentator. He could have a career as a journalist, although more as a writer than as a presenter. But he could definitely go into coaching. He could definitely still be involved in the sport in some capacity. Maybe going into as an administrator or as a sporting ambassador. Like, there's definitely a role for him within tennis post playing, but there's got to be a point where he has to go. I can't do this anymore. And same with Nadal. He's basically said, "I'm going to call it." Federer started basically becoming a part-time player. Um, Nadal's got a lot of interests in Spain. Well, doubles are the best. I don't know. Jamie Murray's had a great career in the doubles. He's won a lot. Doesn't get the recognition he deserves. The prize money's less because you've got to split it with your doubles partner. The doubles can sometimes be the most entertaining. I don't know why. It's the way they've obviously individual talent over team talent. I honestly don't know why. But again, that's is what it is. It's the way the sport promotes itself. Um, it's just how the sport promotes itself as the individual against the individual. It's like that gladiatorial contest. Whereas doubles, you've got two pairs of individuals against two pairs. I think it is the one-on-one aspect of where you mentally and physically and skillfully you've got to outwit and outplay your opponent. But doubles is fun. I think it's the better form of it. It's just for some reason it's not as promotionable as the singles events. The mixed doubles is hilarious, but the doubles are quite good. But it's a different style of tennis. It's almost a different sport. Um, but you know, when we dissect Andy Murray's career, it's a pretty good career. He's an Olympic medalist. He's a Grand Slam multiple Grand Slam winner. He laid the foundation for other players to be inspired to take that next level in their career. He's inspired a lot of British kids to play. So Andy Murray, I think, will leave an important aspect on the sport. Well, the Bryan brothers, yes, they're specialist doubles players. They've never played single. They are specialist doubles players. So you have to bear that in mind. That is they've got a specialty, doubles players, and they're twins as well. So I think that will help with that combination of they're both similar in their physical attributes, but they are specialist doubles players. You will not see the Bryan brothers play singles. They do not have the individual game to play singles. They'd be slaughtered. But Nadal and Federer, I don't think Nadal and Federer have played many doubles, and again, their games suit singles. So um, there are certain players who are literally it's like the Williams sisters are brilliant playing doubles. They grew up together, and one's power, one's finesse. But no, the Bryan brothers, they were pure doubles players, and I think the most successful doubles pairing of all time. Ridiculous how good they were. But this is where I think tennis is that multi-discipline. You've got mixed doubles, singles, and then your pure doubles with you know. But it's there's been a tennis has been a discussion point for a few years now about pay disparity, promotion of the women's side of the game. There are issues with um, the prize money and potential corruption and match fixing, and then there are issues with how the lower rankings are dealt with, and yeah, I think things have improved on the aspects of prize money for the women's and mixed doubles, but um, there are issues within the sport structurally, and match fixing allegations are starting to rear their ugly head, and prize money distribution, and I've been keeping an eye on what's happening with tennis. Ireland will be playing against France in the final of the under 20s rugby union. That's ridiculous. The fact that they're the two favourites for the main prize in October, November time, you can just see how the development of France and Ireland through the age grades and into the senior levels of the game is there. I think France and Ireland could dominate rugby union for quite some time going forward. Um, yeah, the pathways are in place. I'm surprised, obviously, the All Blacks, junior All Blacks, but we were graced by a great All Black side for the best part of the decade, and now the wheels come off with the All Blacks. They are beatable, and the talent pathways don't seem to be as talented. So there are warning signs for New Zealand in regards to their youth structures and talent pathways. I don't think England and Wales will do much in regards. Oh, into the World Cup now. Wales, well, half their team has basically just said we're internationally retiring from playing. Warren Gatland's statement saying he wasn't aware of the ongoing situation in regards to the finances, in my opinion, is bollocks because he was there in 2019 when the same issues were raising their ugly head then. Um, and I think a lot has happened in between COVID. So the issue was bad in 2019. It got worse. So how Warren Gatland can say he was not aware of the issues? Was he not paying attention to the sports media in the intervening 3 years? I think Wales are in serious trouble. England, Steve Borthwick, it's a transition period. I'm not expecting him to, do much, but this is where they might go on a bit of a run and go on a bit of a run and I think overachieve. But Wales, I think, are in serious trouble. I think Wales may struggle to get out of the group. I think Wales could be in serious trouble. Several senior players who are integral to how they played over recent years, who are in leadership positions, have said, I'm retiring." So they've just lost a lot of leadership, and they're relying on a very young squad with a lot of players who've not necessarily played a lot of game time. So I think Wales are in serious trouble. Serious trouble. England, Uh, I'm not expecting much, if I'm honest. Team in transition, new coach, and both Wales and England had problems in the club game as well financially. So that's another side plot. As these two sides are struggling, the club game is struggling as well. So let that sink in. But I think I think England might surprise a few people with what they're going to produce, but Wales are in trouble. Um, I'm not excited for it, but I'm not as excited as in previous years. I don't know. I mean, we've obviously had a lot of issues with rugby union over a few years now. I think Ireland and France are the two favourites with form going in, how they've been playing and developing. I think France and Ireland, you know, are a step above the rest of the Northern Hemisphere, and I think a step above the Southern Hemisphere as well. I think they are in a position where they could dominate like the All Blacks and South Africans have dominated in the Southern Hemisphere and Australia dominated in the Southern Hemisphere for they are in that position to turn the sport on its head. Um, but I'm not overly excited for it. I'm not as excited for this World Cup as I was in say 2007 when it was in France or 2011 when it was in New Zealand. I'm not as excited at all. Um, I feel that rugby union's at a crossroads as well, and I think they're getting a lot of decisions wrong. And World Rugby and the domestic unions are being very reactionary to a lot of problems the sport's facing rather than proactionary. And they're making some really poor decisions in regards to changing rules and modifying the game, tackle area, and they need to just stop with all the rule tinkering and roll the rules back to where they were in the early 2000s. I think they've got a lot of things wrong. Um, no, I don't think so. I think they I think they've definitely now got the systems in place, and I think Andy Farrell's got them on the right track. I think they get past that quarter final stage. I think they're going to be very difficult to stop. But we've got to see what the French do as well. I've got to do a preview of the 2023 Rugby World Cup and look at the groups because all teams are qualified now. We now know the situation some teams are in. So I will have to do a preview for that. We've got a few months yet, but um, I think Ireland. A lot of the players in this squad weren't there 4 years ago, weren't there 8 years ago. They've got a lot of young talent coming through, and I think some of these under 20s players will get called up to the senior squad. They've got to a final. They know they've got no worries about a quarter final. They're by the way they play. The systems are all the way through. France as well. They've got no fear again. I'm surprised France have never actually won a World Cup. But France and Ireland have now started to actually get things right. They both have their different styles. They both play a certain way, and it suits the player development they have. It suits the club game that they have, and there we go. I think Ireland will get past the quarter final. Again, I'll have to do a preview. I can't remember the groups either because some teams are obviously qualified since I last looked at things. Um, yeah, certain teams seem to always get drawn in the same groups. I don't like that. But you've got tier one, and the way rugby union works is completely different to football. It, there's less nations playing at a high enough standard to all put in the same group of death. I think 2015, England, Wales, and Australia were all in the same group, which I thought was ridiculous. Um, and that didn't work out too well for England, did it? Um, but you are limited because less international teams play at a high enough standard to be competitive against each other. Um, so there's that, and there's this new idea for a new rugby competition, which completely devalues the Six Nations and Rugby Championship and the Lions tours completely. Again, World Rugby's trying to do what football's done with the Nations League format, which is what I don't like. I really don't like that. Um, is 20 teams too many for a World Cup? A lot of the smaller nations or lesser nations, not its players, because they would easily put me through a brick wall, but a lot of nations have complained about the turnaround between games and basically fixture congestion. It seems to impact the lower ranked nations over the All Blacks, your Englands, your Frances. Your nations like Namibia and Uruguay get shafted with the fixturing. Um, which means what Japan did in like the last couple of World Cups makes it all more remarkable that they've now broken that ceiling, so to speak. The reason why not 16 teams is rugby wants to make money. They want to keep growing the product and get more professional leagues over time, and keep growing the game. You want to keep growing the game because sponsors want to return. A lot of nations are now banging on the door wanting to get a professional setup in place. It means, a greater quality of play. Um, so yeah, we'll see what happens there. Sri Lanka and the Netherlands have qualified for 2023 World Cup. Look, the Netherlands are actually pretty decent T20 one-day setup. It won't be long before the Netherlands finally gets test status. They've been playing cricket for a long time. Sri Lanka, I'm surprised they had to go through a qualification process. They're a test nation. Come on. I think test nations are automatically qualified for the Cricket World Cup, and then those less nations are qualified, but that's another thing. Uruguay have actually massively improved. People say haven't, they actually have. Namibia, they're limited again by by their population size. For a small country, they do produce a lot of good athletes, though. And a lot of the Namibian players end up playing in South Africa anyway. I wouldn't say they're not getting any better. I think they are, but they are limited by money, basically. Money is limited. Namibia's got a tiny population for a huge country, a massive country, about the size of South Africa. Actually, it's just only a handful of million people live in Namibia. There's not a lot of money in Namibia. Beautiful country though. And Uruguay, rugby union is not the top professional sport. Obviously, football is. But they've got a pretty decent rugby program now, and they are starting to win at their level easily. Look, they've beaten the US and Canada quite. They're the best team in the Americas behind Argentina. They've got some good professional players. They've adapted well to the Major League Rugby setup with all of their players playing in the US and Canada, and obviously that regular professional training every week, playing every week, being professional. The game has come a long way. People should be a bit careful about criticising how Uruguay have developed over the last decade or so. This is why World Rugby wants to keep growing the World Cup format. Oh yeah, I mean, look, Uruguay will batter Romania. Actually, Romania's in a bit of a mess at the moment. They've declined as a side, but England and Uruguay, okay, you're going to have a hard sell in rugby union, but in football that sells. So it's all about getting those tier 3 and tier 2 nations to the same level as your tier 1s, and that's where you want to grow the professional game. The problem is the professional game has money issues. So the way the game has evolved since 1995 has been haphazard. They want to be professional like rugby league and as competitive as football when it comes to the international game. It's just not working. They have they screw things up. Namibia and Andorra, the population sizes are completely different. Namibia's got a couple of million people. Namibia's got a couple of million people living in it. I mean, the capital, Windhoek, has got more people than the whole of Andorra. So that is a complete poor comparison altogether. That is poor comparison. If you were comparing sporting nations like Namibia and Uruguay, their populations are quite similar. Uruguay is a lot more successful than Namibia. and a lot of it is to do with money and you know investment and the history of structure. Because Namibia is got a very interesting history, whereas Uruguay's been an independent state since the 1830s. Their professional footballing side of things and rugby union football have been well established in the country for a long time, whereas Namibia was a German colony, then it was a British colony, then it's an African colony. It's had a very, very difficult history as a country. It's only been an independent country since 94, since the end of apartheid, when it was separated officially from South Africa. There was a period of an insurgency, there was political instability. Because it was part of South Africa, it was in the apartheid era, so it was not allowed to compete. It was German, it was South African, West Africa, I think it was. Botswana's another one with a small population, yes. Botswana's another one. But these countries do not have a lot of money behind them. Uruguay's got a highly educated populace, other high employment levels, higher salaries, more money. Yeah. And now we're talking about geography. This all belongs on the other channel. Damn you! Yes, some of the South Africa is the dominant sporting power in Africa, and it's to do with infrastructure, money, size of economy. Um, pathways are in place. Um, Swaziland, what it was known as, and Lesotho, well, yeah, they're basically similar size. They're very tiny countries in Southeast Africa. Yes, they are. And Swansea used to be Swaziland until about 6, 7 years ago. Um, yeah, I love the geography, but geography belongs on the other channel. But no, when we're talking about countries with small populations that have overachieved, Uruguay, and to be fair, Croatia is another one. Namibia, they keep qualifying for tournaments. They keep qualifying for cricket and rugby World Cup, so they are producing some decent level talent to play at a higher level. Um, you know, um, some small nations really have overachieved. Croatia in Europe is one, Uruguay in South America is one, and Namibia, I do think, in Africa is another one. They have overachieved for their population size, absolutely. Um, but then you've got to look at the sporting infrastructure and the pathways in place, and Croatia and Uruguay have the pathways in place, whereas Namibia doesn't have the pathways in place, but they produce some of the best rugby players the world's ever seen, like Percy Montgomery and Jacques Berger. There you go. People forget Jacques Berger. He's played for Saracens. It was Namibia captain for the best part of a decade. Um, National sports. Well, like Namibia and Uruguay and Croatia obviously all play association football. I mean, Namibia have qualified for the African Cup of Nations a few times, but I think rugby union and cricket are more popular in Namibia because of that South African influence. Uruguay, it is obviously football, but rugby union is quite a popular participation sport. But they're also very good at a lot of. They're a multi-sport country. Well, I wouldn't know. I know polo is quite popular in South America, and I think Uruguay, much like Argentina, it's a very popular sport. Um, Croatia, water polo is quite popular. Basketball is quite popular. Ice hockey is quite. Croatia's got a lot of sports that are quite popular as participation sports and spectator sports. Obviously, football they are very, very good at, and really punch above their weight. Um, so, I mean, what's the national sport of Australia? Is it Aussie rules? Is it rugby league? Is it cricket? Is it soccer? Is it what's Australia's national sport? Yeah, tennis is very popular. I think the climate in certain areas like Argentina and Uruguay and Chile is like the climate is quite good to train and play, and they have produced some great players out, especially Argentina. Um, some, Soccer is not popular in South America. What are you on about? Jesus, uh, the first ever World Cup was held in South America. What are you talking about? Argentina's most popular sport is polo. Oh, Australia, it's the game. The game participation levels are higher than rugby league and Aussie rules. More kids are playing with the round ball than the oval ball. Problem is the administration side of the sport. That's the problem. The TV deal and the administration. So the commercial side and the administration side. of the sport in Australia is a problem, although they are hosting the Women's World Cup. So that should actually help boost participation and boost visibility of the sport. Um, and you know, the problem is the administration side. There's been a lot of issues with the administration side for a long period of time. The commercial arrangements have also, raised a few eyebrows as well. The TV deal is absolute dog shit down under. Yeah, a lot of Australians do follow the European and South American leagues because of that European influence with obviously British and Irish when it was a colony, when various states were before so Federation and the Commonwealth, and then post World War II, a lot of Central and Eastern Europeans from the Balkans and places like Hungary. A lot of Germans went over, a lot of Italians. So there's a big European population, and now there's quite a few South Americans have gone over as well. So there is this European South American immigrant population there, and they love the round ball. They love playing with the round ball, not the oval ball. And so, as a participation sport, a community level, especially in Melbourne, and to a certain extent Sydney, but mostly in Melbourne, there is a big community aspect to it. Um, they have produced some great players. I mean, you don't get your Badukas and your Harry Kewells without having, participation levels. They were good players. Um, but there is a definite issue with the domestic TV rights, the overseas TV rights, and the administration of the sport is an absolute shambles. But Australian sport administration has never been a strong suit of, of things. For some reason, Australian sport has some of the best sports in the world, some of the best sports leagues in the world. Like Aussie rules and rugby league should basically just sell themselves. It's the administration of these sports and leagues in Australia that really hamper them, because look what's happening right now with the NRL. Look what's happening with the AFL, where they haven't chosen a replacement to Gil McLaughlin. I mean, the AFL CEO was meant to have stood down. He's still in position as an interim now because they haven't found a replacement for him. The NRL and the RLPA at loggerheads over the next CBA negotiation. The A League wasn't always called the A League because the previous league administration collapsed and they had to rename and rebrand themselves. So, what's the sport infrastructure like in Tasmania? The AFL's made a mess out of their Tasmanian expansion, but a lot of players who play in the AFL or play Aussie rules come from Tassie. Of course, you've got the famous Ricky Ponting, who is from Tasmania. But it's not. It's a bit. There's only 600,000 people live in Tasmania. It's not. It's the least populated apart from the Northern Territory of all the states and territories. It's got the smallest capital city in Hobart. Um, there are social issues in Tasmania. It's not fantastic, and I'm being fair. I think a lot of Tasmanians would agree. Things aren't fantastic. The AFL have completely ballsed up their growth in Tasmania. There's been a massive balls up there. Not that I've been following it too closely, but I know it's not going in the direction the AFL would like. And while they've got a great Sheffield Shield cricket team, and they do produce great cricketers as well as great AFL players, yeah, it's not great. It isn't great. They could do a lot better than they are. Because Australia is a sports mad country. Every state and territory has a state league in something or a territory league in something. But I think the AFL is where they ballsed it up. They've been talking about this 19th team or moving North Melbourne to Tasmania permanently. They ballsed up potential stadium development. There's a lot of frustration with the locals as well about, is the AFL going to come here? Do we want the AFL here? They do love their sport. And it's not just Ricky Ponting who's a famous Tasmanian. There's a lot of Tasmanians who played all the codes, all the sports. But Ricky Ponting is one that stands out. AFL has won the battle between AFL and NRL in Tasmania for that viewership and that fandom. But the 2003 Rugby Union World Cup had games in Tasmania. I remember they just used a cricket pitch. They actually used the cricket oval to host games. I think it was in Launceston. It might have been Hobart, but I think who do they dislike? I think both rivalries are quite friendly. Ironically, I think the media hype up the dislike between England and the Aussies, but ironically, I think the rivalries are pretty friendly in comparison to other national sporting rivalries. Obviously, Australia New Zealand uh, is a rivalry that has had some heated moments, especially in rugby league and rugby union. There are some definitely heated moments there over the years. Um, Rugby union's the Bledisloe Cup. Rugby league, I think, is a lot closer than rugby union. But I think the Aussies miss a touring Lions team, or missing touring the UK and playing the Lions. Um, I think this is where I think we've got the end of series or end of season test matches wrong in rugby league. Yes, I'm really looking forward to Tonga playing 3 test matches against England. I think it's going to be fantastic. I think they're going to be great games to watch. I think England are vulnerable. I think Tonga have come a long way. They've got some great players that they are eligible to select. It's going to be a proper test series. But I would have liked that to be a Great Britain Lions versus Australia series. So there's that. Those test series meant something. I'm young and I'm old enough to remember Mal Meninga playing right at the end of his career, and the Wigan fans just stood up. All the fans just stood on their feet and applauded him. And that's how the Barmy Army's born, by the way. It's not a cricket thing; it's a rugby league thing originally, but then it becomes a cricket thing, and now it's just a Barmy Army, Great Britain or England, overseas or at home. The Barmy Army is a thing, apart from football, which I just don't understand. But football following is, yeah, I'm not a fan of the England football following. But when it comes to rugby league, rugby union, rugby league, and cricket, the Barmy Army is fantastic. England Scotland rivalry in football is more heated than Australia and New Zealand. England Scotland's the oldest international sporting rivalry ever. I think the rugby union predates the football, so let that sink in. Yeah, I should visit New Zealand. I've got a cousin out in New Zealand and her family, so it's on my bucket list to do. My brother-in-law's family are from New Zealand, so it's on the bucket list. But yeah, there's that. Is it Scotland being poor for a long time? I don't feel like it is anymore. England and Scotland in the rugby union is still pretty good, but in other sports it's not as great. No. Do we think England versus Wales in football is intense? I don't think so. They don't play each other quite as regularly as people think. Not since the 70s. I do think, again, Wales not been very good until the last decade or so. And that lack of in qualifiers or um, tournament internationals playing each other over a long period of time has an impact. Um, I don't think it's because England are so superior. There was a period in the 70s where all the home nations were kicking lumps out of each other, and England weren't the best side. Scotland were the best side in the 70s out of the home nations, and Northern Ireland were pretty good back then as well. But there is definitely Scotland and Wales really struggling um, for a long. Wales have been better in more recent times. They've appeared at 3 tournaments. Scotland have only appeared at 1 tournament in 24 years. Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland will qualify for tournaments. So there is that. One thing is very expensive to visit down under if you don't know anyone. I was lucky because I had my uncle who let me stay in his place rather than pay hundreds for hotels. Hostels, try hostels. Look, yeah, if you've got family or friends over there, it does reduce the cost significantly if you've got a place to stay. Um, or if you've got a load of money and you just don't care, it's fine. But if you are on a budget, Australia and New Zealand are not cheap to visit, not at all. Um, but again, the, um, the, the, the distance. It's a long way to go. It's a lot of travel. It's not cheap to travel there. It's not. You either get a working visa, but look, I would love to go over there if the channel was self sufficient and I had enough money, then yes, I would absolutely 100% be happy to jump on a plane at some point straight over. But cost, and you need and to do it effectively and to really enjoy it, you would need more than your standard, 20 days holiday that I get with my job. Um, any sports games? The AFL Grand Final, the NRL Grand Final, and State of Origin Rugby League would definitely be on my hit lists. Go to all the test venues in Australia for cricket. So yeah, there are some on my hit list. The MCG's on the hit list. The Gabba, the new Wacker Oval, Perth Oval, whatever it is now, Adelaide Oval. Don't want to go to Marvel Stadium. I don't like enclosed stadiums, indoor stadiums for outdoor sport events. I don't like them. That ruins the test nature or the challenging nature of playing in all conditions. So Marvel Stadium, former Etihad Stadium, is not on my hit list, even though it's a fantastic facility. Not on my hit list. Um, I wouldn't say the cost of living is very high in Australia. In certain, it depends where you are in Australia. Certain towns and cities are cheaper than others. So Sydney and Melbourne, for example, are really expensive. Tasmania is expensive for certain items, but it's cheaper to live for property. Places like Darwin and Perth are quite cheap, but salaries are higher. If I was to do my job equivalent over in Australia, I can earn 3 times as much. So I can earn 3 times as much doing the same job I'm doing now. After looking at exchange rate, I could earn more. So there is that. I would love to live in Australia, but I would probably end up somewhere like Perth or Tasmania, where it's slightly cool, or Darwin, just where it's hot all year round. Whatever. West Coast is cheaper than the East Coast, but West Coast is very limited compared to East Coast. Well, you've got Perth, and you've got Perth, and Perth, and Perth, and Western Australia is just big, and there's Perth. South Australia is Adelaide, and that's it. Although there are smaller towns and cities, but they're tiny. No, I would. There's a couple of places I want to go to. Perth and Darwin are on my to-do list. Darwin more to do with the Second World War and looking at that part of Northern Territory, Northern Queensland, to do with the history. But yes, now compared to here, where I get okay, but yeah, again, my rent. You're up north. My rent is ridiculous. Uh, my rent is my rent is ridiculous. So I'm getting less than you. I'm getting 1.4, 1.5. My rent is nearly £1,000. So yeah, I would happily move to Australia because my pay is more for the same job. Obviously, um, yeah, but you're living up north, so I mean, I'm assuming you're in private rent. I'm in private rent, but my rent is 3 times as much as your rent. So that is literally it. You're paying less than 400 a month. I'm paying, uh, with my bills included, I'm paying a lot more than that. I'm paying a hell of a lot more than that. So we're on very similar salaries. Ironically, I think the most I've earned in a month for my job with all the overtimes and bank holidays is about 2 grand. Um, but my rent is double, and we're on similar salaries, so that is ridiculous. If I was up north, I would be paying similar for rent as I am here, as no similar to rent as rugby league history is paying, but my wages would go a lot further. Cost of living, cost of living. I mean, the southeast of England is absolutely ridiculous. I would happily move up to County Durham or Carlisle or somewhere in Lancashire. I mean, even though I'm a Blackburn fan, I'd move to Burnley in a heartbeat because I can do the same job, get paid the same money, and my rent would be like pennies. Um, no, a lot of people who go to Australia move to Melbourne and Sydney, or those massive uh, urban areas surrounding Melbourne and Sydney. 'Cause there are other big cities like Newcastle and Geelong and Wollongong and places like that, and Central Coast. And they do forget to mention that there's vast places that are a lot cheaper. Like Mount Gambier in South Australia is an underrated little city. You've got areas around Perth, other towns and cities that are not mentioned. You've got Northern Territory and stuff. I think there's an attempt from Australia to downplay. There is a there is a thing in the Aussie media calling us the whining Poms. But a lot of British have gone. I know a lot of people don't know they've stayed. Um, but it does depend. I think property prices is the problem in Australia. They've just exploded. Uh, New Zealand, I think that it's slightly cooler. Um, but New Zealand is a weird one. Very weird. Very weird one. Would I live in Scotland? No, is the answer to that. Absolutely not. Wouldn't go that far north. I've got Scottish friends, but I wouldn't live in Scotland. Um, there's a lot of issues with the infrastructure, and if you're outside of Glasgow, Edinburgh, Aberdeen, for example, you are buggered, absolutely buggered for work. There's not as people think Highland Scotland's beautiful and living in Inverness is fantastic. And you're buggered. Wales, no, ironically, again, it's to do with yes, I could happily live where I live now, but in Wales there's less work. No, I wouldn't live in Cardiff. I hate big towns and cities. I've lived alongside the A4 for 6 months. Yeah, I'm not. Well, actually, no, I've lived alongside the A4 for about a year and a half in total. But yeah, no, I wouldn't. I need to have a bit of peace and quiet and to wind down. Where I live on the edge of where I live now, town I live now. Admittedly, I've got a major A road one side of the block of flats and a major B road trunk road the other side of the flat. It's actually a lot quieter in the evenings, so it's a bit more peace and quiet, a little bit more out of the way. But if I was to live in a similar location, like at the edge of a town or something in Wales or Scotland, yeah, I'd be a lot further out the way. Connectivity to do important things like go to meetings, go shopping. Well, it'd be just too much. Um, I think I would like to go to Australia, but there is that massive drink culture. They drink more than we do. Per head per capita. They are pissheads. Everyone goes, "I'm British." You know, you see the videos of us overseas fighting in nightclubs and bars. Drink culture here. Australia is another level. There is a massive, massive issue with the booze culture. It is a big problem. Um, um, Well, if I was to live in a small town or village like Holyhead, for example, I wouldn't actually need a car because I can do everything I need to do in town. Go to the local shop, get bits and pieces. Because if this was to make me money, this YouTube was to be the money earner. I don't have to do a day job. I could locate anywhere I wanted, and I would like to move somewhere like Holyhead, for example, would be perfect for me because it is a small town, and I don't have to go out of town to do anything. I don't have to go far to do anything. And there is a mainline railway that does go back into England and the rest of Wales, so it's not the end of the world. Um, no, the Aussie, they've actually done surveys. We don't drink as much per head of capita for every individual person. If you were to average out your alcohol content, we drink less units. We're actually drinking less in the UK now than what we were 10 years ago, ironically. No, I wouldn't go to Thailand. It's tropical. It's too much humidity. Doesn't do my lungs any good. And I've had a lot of health issues, so Thailand would not be a permanent destination. Stopping off for a day or a couple of days whilst on transit to another country, yes, I would visit, but I wouldn't stay in Thailand. Health issues, I'll be buggered. Um, Say, for instance, if I jump on a train here, you see people drinking cans at 9 a.m. I never see that in Australia. No drinking on trains or getting on trains is illegal. Yeah, because it's illegal. And I don't particularly want to cross paths with an Aussie copper because I don't want to screw up in Australia. But again, it's illegal here. It's illegal to drink on public transport here. It's the enforcement side of it, and also, yeah, it's the enforcement side of it. And 9 a.m. they're probably still recovering from the night before. They've already run out of money and they're going down to the oh shit, what's their version of the job centre? Oh, what's the Aussie version of job centre? Uh, oh, what's the Aussie? But no, the drink culture is definitely it's ingrained in their culture. Every Aussie TV series or film, there's always. But the surveys have been done and conducted, and apparently we are drinking less now. Not by much, but we are drinking less than what we were a decade ago. Uh, Partly we've lost a load of pubs. A load of our pubs have gone. Australia, it's the other way around. They've still got a load of bars. We don't have the same city centre nightlife that we used to. It's still a fucking stab central, glass and punch up central, but we are ironically drinking less. No, it didn't really because you have smoking areas outside. I think it's more to do with the rates that um, local governments or local councils, when you've got business rates, if you want to, and licensing, finance, it's more the financial side of taxes, business rates, the cost to get your personal license, finding staff because of things like the minimum wage, and now we don't have because of and also minimum pricing of alcohol is not a legislation here. It is in Scotland. Here it isn't. So supermarkets and corner shops. I was with my mates the other day, and one of my mates he's on the verge of alcoholism. I would say he started drinking at like 11 in the morning. But we went to like a corner shop, and a 4 pack of beer is cheaper than 4 pints of beer. Let's just say that. I got him a 4 pack of beer because I hadn't seen him for a while. He's a bit short of cash. Got paid more this month than last month. So I was like, I've got a bit of extra cash. Haven't seen you for a year. Bollocks. And it was £4.95 for a pack of four. Big can, so yeah. Um, so yeah, pack of four for £4.95. Where if you were going to, I mean, we went into a pub later, and I bought myself a soft drink, and he got a pint, and that was six something quid. So it was about £3 a pint. Yeah. So yeah, the but that bearing in mind the overheads as well. Um, Staffing costs. Some pubs just can't get staff because the hours aren't great, the pay isn't great. Um, License restrictions. Some pubs don't open until a certain time. Some pubs shut part of the day. Less people are now actually going into town centres and city centres because of the shopping online and working from home. So there's a whole range of aspects, and yeah, sports fans to a certain extent do keep pubs going, but the taxes don't help either. I find pubs in Australia, especially in the last 10 year, are going through a renovation boom. Now they all look, they do look very generic. The pubs and bars and hotels in Australia, there is a generic look of poking machines, bar, couple pool tables, some bikies, a guy getting stabbed, and a punch up, and all before 11:30 in the morning. Um, pub- um, Pubs around Black Country are always yeah. Wolves is the biggest club in the Black Country, although Vauxhall fans and what's the other club I didn't know, and West Brom fans might disagree with that. I love pubs in England, but they have old Victorian. I think the word is called indic. In I can't pronounce Indy Kit, Indicate, whatever it is. A lot of pubs are carrying. It's to do with the building owners, and how can Walsall disagree? Because Walsall is Walsall. It's like Walsall is the Midlands version of Millwall. It's a shithole. Their fans are thugs. Um, and my Walsall video got more views on the brief history of a football club than Wolves. So I actually think there are more Walsall fans out there. How can Walsall disagree? They're not a small club. They're actually, I think, an older. The club is a similar age to Wolves, ironically. Um, and yeah, and they do have a fair following in the Black Country. They just haven't made the top flight. That's the difference. I think you'll find their fan base is bigger than you think. I think you'll find their fan base is bigger than you think. There's a lot of clubs where the media perception, the media bias reports are the so-called Big Six. Um, I think you'll find clubs like Walsall and Port Vale and you, you, yeah, lower level football clubs in the football league actually bigger fan bases than the media would like you to know because for whatever reason, you can't promote that. It's like, well, there was a really nice pub on one of the suburbs I live called the White Cockatoo. Oh, here we go. The White Cockatoo. It was a very old historic pub. It got bought out by this young rich lad who gutted the entire. Um, yeah, but again, you've also got to remember how capacity and health and safety standards and legislation changes in regards to how many people you can have inside a venue and licensing. I don't know about Aussie licensing laws, and that obviously varies from state to state. Country to country. I don't drink anymore. I've only been to one pub in a year. Uh, no, watch my football club history video. Walsall never been in the top division. Nearly got to the top division. I don't drink. I used to. I used to work in a couple of pubs. I well, when I was a student and going to house parties and this time of year when I was at college and all that. Yeah, obviously you would go down the offie and stuff, and barbecues. Obviously, yes, I would go to the offie, but in my opinion, I do go into pubs partly because I've got a lot of mates who work in pubs and run pubs, and one of my mates now owns a chain of boozers. One I know he owns two pubs and he runs two pubs and a nightclub. Um, so I've got mates who work in the pub bar industry, like so I do go into pubs, but I have a love hate relationship with them. I can go to a pub and just drink soft drinks all night. People go, "Why are you here?" I'm here for the social aspect. But then you look at the social aspect and you see the same drunk in the corner. You'll see the same people binge drinking on a payday binge drink who are going to get absolutely smashed. And you'll see the same drug dealers and the same dickheads. Um, but yeah, it's just is what it is. Can get a bit rowdy in pubs on the weekends. I've never not been to a pub on a weekend where there isn't a punch up there. Unfortunately, that is the aspect of it. Is a lot of people who don't have work the next day. A lot of people still get paid weekly. A lot of pay dates fall just before the weekends. You are going to have. This is another aspect where um, puts a lot of people off going because of especially when sports on as well, like a major like the boxing or football or whatever major sporting event. And you get a lot of people quite passionate, quite drunk, a lot of emotion. Um, we've seen it. Um, I, it, it does put off a lot of people who just want to have a casual, social gathering. They might want to. I don't like watching live sport in a pub. I hate it. Um, Gastropub is a Toby Carvery because it's technically a licensed premises. Or people getting on the old Colombian marching powder or whatever, or bit of speed. Yeah, that's been going on for years. That's not a new thing. That's been going on for donkeys, not just in this country, but across Europe, across Australia, New Zealand, America. That's been going on for donkeys years. That's not a new thing. Um, that is a problem. That's another reason why a lot of people get put off. Uh, and that and then we look at and I circle back to certain sports having a lads party culture, and rugby league and cricket are two of the sports where high profile players have been caught on the piss, on the sauce, on the gear. And it's a bad look when you're trying to sell that sport to families and grow your sports appeal. And so I circle back to that rugby league aspect, that AFL aspect, the NRL, the AFL, Super League, cricket, certain cases with football where there is that drink drug culture, that lads Friday night kind of culture. Um, so there is that. Every town has a rough pub with a reputation. Mine's the Reindeer pub. Ironically, where I live in Woking, there's actually a few pubs with really poor reps. Where I used to, well, I don't technically live in Woking, but I do, but I don't. My postcode's Woking, but technically I'm Finch Hampstead, but technically I could also be Crowthorne. Eh, I'm basically sort of like on the edge of a village and two villages in a town where it's literally within a 5 minute walk, I'm in Fields. Um, every town does have a rough pub. Yes, yes. I actually know quite a few rough pubs where you just don't want to go there. And some pubs, just reputation. It puts people off. People who might raise the character of an establishment because of the reputation that goes before. Same with football clubs having a reputation of a bad fan base, or a certain stadium being an intimidating atmosphere. You get that reputation, so opposition fans may not want to do that away day. You don't like watching sports in pubs either. Honestly, if I'm not at the game, I'd rather watch it by myself than someone other people at home. Yeah, I agree with that. For me, I can't justify the price of drinks at a pub anyway if I want to drink. So then I circle back to sporting events and getting the pricing right, and where I think Major League Baseball got things wrong, especially 4 years ago, is concessions. So, are you allowed to drink a beer at a game? Baseball, you are. Rugby, football, you're not. Um, so yeah, food and drink. So if you are at a sporting event, or going to or coming from, let's say you've been to the lunchtime kickoff. Let's say you're watching your local team play. Be it, let's say, rugby, football, rugby, it doesn't matter. Watching your local team play, it's a day game, but you wanna grab a bite to eat and a quick drink on the way home. Chew the fat. Price is an off putter. Absolutely. You've spent a lot on your ticket. You've spent a lot on travel. Going there, going for a pint. Oh, it's especially in London or I don't know, rather quite expensive place. London's quite expensive. I use that as an example. You look at the price. Maybe not for me. You might go to the horse racing at, I don't know, I don't know where the Welsh Nationals, Chepstow. I think the Welsh Nationals at Chepstow. You might go to the horse racing, for example. So Wolverhampton, you might go to the flat Wolverhampton. And you want to get a pint, and you look at that and go, no thanks. And that puts people off who like to have a drink when they watch their sports and relax and be social and have a bit of a chinwag with their mates and maybe the rival fans. And they go, that's just put me off. So the price of concessions, that's something that again I relate in sport is people look at, ticket price is one thing, and then what the owners of sports teams, you know, and this is where fans get annoyed, is when we're having the debate about high ticket prices. Team owners don't care how much it costs for you, the fan, for your transportation, your food and drink before you even get to the arena or the stadium. They care about what you buy from the stadium gate all the way to your seat. That's ridiculous. £12 at Headingley in Leeds. Are you kidding me? £12 for you could buy a 24 pack at an offie for that. And I know I don't drink anymore, and therefore, for me, okay, I'll be on the soft drinks. But I wouldn't be surprised if the soft drink, prices were also ridiculously high. Let's say you go to the bar, and you go, okay, I'm not drinking, I'm driving. Let's say you're one of those fans who's the designated driver. So you've got three mates with you. You're the one who's driven there. You've done the parking. You paid for the parking ticket. Okay, I'll go to the park and have one soft drink. Let's say a lemonade and have 3 pints of sausages. And it comes to 40 odd quid. You're going to go to your mate, bollocks to this. We're not doing this anymore. We're going to go have a barbecue at home, watch it on the telly. That's the thing. You're going to go, right, we'll have a barbecue at home. We're not, and this keeps fans away as well, is concession prices. They mark up. There's a massive markup. But £12 a pint is not. I mean, that's London sporting event prices, and I know they get expensive. And we've seen it over when I've looked on Facebook groups like the NHL. Or, when I used to have Twitter, I used to look at what people were like. Oh, I'm going to the All-Star game in insert major league here. I'm taking the kids, and then I go, oh, it's cost me X amount of dollars for food and drink for two kids, me and the wife. Like, whoa, that's expensive. And you compare that to, and you think that's a double markup. So when people go, America's cost of living is cheap in certain states. No, it's not. A few rough pubs in Sydney, Scruffy Murphy's, the Stein Hotel, Three Wise Monkeys, the Ivy. I've actually heard of those. I've never been to Australia, but I've heard of those locations. PJ Gallagher's at Parramatta after 8 p.m. Anywhere in Parramatta after 8 p.m., I believe, is the answer you're looking for. Anywhere in Greater Western Sydney after 8 p.m. is not safe. It's a thing. I'm not joking. I do follow the the Aussie news, and watch a lot of Aussie documentaries and investigative journalism. And I can tell you now, anywhere in Greater Western Sydney after 8 p.m. and you don't want to be out. I can tell you that. PJ Gallagher's. I think yeah, PJ Gallagher's does sound quite chainy to me, but yeah, I think a lot of you're talking about 8 p.m. it getting rough. I mean, okay, that's quite early in the evening for that. If you're not a local, bugger off. That's a bit worrying. But no, Sydney and Melbourne do have some undesirable. It's a bit yeah. There was one Parramatta, Drummond, Sydney City, and I think other. That just sounds like a small local chain of pubs, like a brewery. Like you've got Braxby's here, or you've got what other ones are there? Green King. So you've got the brewery one, and then you've got the chain like Green King or O'Neill's. Just sounds like a very small regional New South Wales or Sydney chain of pubs. In the early tomorrow morning, the CONCACAF Gold Cup semi-finals, USA, Panama, Jamaica, Mexico. Fun fact: there are twice the amount of kangaroos in Australia than there are people. Yeah, there's also for every one person in New Zealand, there's like 700,000 sheep. So there's like 70 million sheep in New Zealand for 5 million people. That's not a fun fact. When I used to go there, the doorman would scan your driver's license on this machine, which was linked to it would come back if you're wanted for anything. That just tells you how bad the situation is when you've got to have your driving license checked to see if you have got any outstanding warrants. Um, are there jokes in Australia? I know it's illegal to fight a kangaroo unless you're drunk. That's a thing. That's a law. It's illegal to fight a kangaroo unless you're drunk. But I like how we got off. I know I said general chat, so I know when I did the title of the live show, I did say general chat. We are just chatting about things that I can relate to sport. But yeah, no, I'm not surprised that there's certain. No, it won't. No, it won't. Not absolutely. Yeah, I don't know why. I think it's to do with the climate and the geology of the soil and all that. New Zealand's a very interesting place. My cousin lives on the North Island, so and has a cattle and sheep farm. So her sheep are more profitable than her cattle, ironically. Although the Canterbury Plain, which is on the North Island, is quite a profitable agricultural area with more cattle than sheep. Um, no, New Zealand is very, very similar to Highland Scotland in its geology, in a sense of and the Alps. Although cattle in the Alps are more popular than sheep, so it does depend on soil and climate and average temperatures and latitude, longitude, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, New Zealand's not going to run out of lamb or mutton anytime soon. Why they found it profitable for sheep over cattle or goats or any other livestock is quite interesting, but they've really gone hard for the Bar black sheep over there, and so yeah, the wool industry, the sheep industry is quite it's a lot. It's bigger in New Zealand per capita than in Australia, even though the Australian farms can be the size of countries. New Zealand, it's very profitable to have sheep. Can relate to the Mighty Ducks, Coach Bombay's Chinese brother, sex addict, drug addict, alcoholic too. Well, how do I respond to that one? What? Well, Emilio Estevez, who is none of the above, but he is related to Charlie Sheen because he's his brother. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one that Emilio Estevez uses his birth name, whereas Charlie Sheen uses his stage name as his given name. Yeah, Mighty Ducks. God, what a I the Mighty Ducks franchise helped grow the sport by encouraging a lot more kids outside of North America and in North America to watch ice hockey. But yeah, I don't eat sheep. I don't eat lamb or mutton. I don't like the taste of it. But you know, I've got family who have sheep farms. So, well, Kiwis get tired of being mistaken for Aussies. There's a massive difference in their accents. Honestly, you cannot mistake a Kiwi. I've got one of my new neighbours is from New Zealand. New Zealand? Well, fish and chips, bro. or Australia. No, there's definite the ditch. I mean, you are not going to mistake a Kiwi for an Aussie. There is no way. You do that, you've got problems. I know a lot of Australians and South Africans get mistaken in the US for each other. The people in the US just don't quite get the Aussies. They confuse Aussies and South Africans and Kiwis. They all think they're Australian. It's only in the US for some reason, but you can definitely tell the difference between a Kiwi and an Aussie. New Zealand has the longest place name coming to 85. Yeah, it's longer than that one in Wales by like 20 letters or something. Um, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce that in Maori. My Polynesian Maori is not good enough to. I can pronounce a lot of Maori place names. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce that. I can pronounce a lot of Maori names. I'm not very good at. South Africans have their accent from the Netherlands, I believe. It's the Afrikaans. So you have English South African and you have Afrikaans. So you have the Dutch, French Huguenot settlers, predominantly Dutch Protestant, but also French Huguenot Protestant, who settled in Holland and then came over with the Cape Colony and the Orange Free State and Natal. And I've got a book about the African colonisation. And then obviously we won the Cape Colony during the French Revolutionary Wars and Napoleonic Wars. So you got the Anglo-Scottish kind of settlers around Cape Town and Port Elizabeth on the coast. The Dutch and the Dutch and the French Huguenot settlers, which is why you've got a lot of French-sounding surnames like Dutoy, Dutois, or you go Dutoy. The Afrikaners, the Great Trek, because a lot of them, where the railway was being built between South Africa and Southern Africa and Egypt, the Great Railway that the Victorians were trying to build. They're the Great Trek. Yeah, so um, uh, yeah, so the South African, it's complex, but there's the Dutch Franco-Dutch influence with the Afrikaners language, and then you've got the Anglo-Scottish, Anglo-Irish kind of Cape Town, Durban, Port Elizabeth influence. Um, South Africa's an interesting place, and then you've got the German influence in places like Namibia and more northern South Africa. So it's interesting because then you go to places like Botswana and Zambia, where they were English colonies throughout the entire period, and they sound very very similar to the South African accent. But there's definite differences, but no, it's the Dutch and the French Huguenots who then settled in Holland in the centuries before colonisation of South Africa. Um, it is an interesting one, but the accent varies because I've got South African friends and I've got South African neighbour and I've got a Kiwi neighbour, so um, that yeah, it's interesting. But the coastal areas, so like Durban, Port Elizabeth, and Cape Town, are the English bits basically, and then the inland central bit is proper Afrikaans. Um, and it's when you listen to someone from Joburg, their accent is completely different from someone from Cape Town or Port Elizabeth. It is completely different. My neighbour Donovan is from Joburg way, and I think he's from Cape Town actually, but he's got a very soft accent. But my friend Christian, who passed away, had a very very thick accent. But his dad was Afrikaans, his mum was of English Welsh origin, so his accent was different. It's Africa. South Africa is like the UK with regional accents. Same with Australia. You can tell someone from Melbourne, from someone from Sydney, from someone from Brisbane, someone from Adelaide. New Zealand, the North Island's a different accent to the South Island. You can definitely tell the difference between someone from Auckland to someone from Christchurch or Dunedin easily. Um, it's like with Italian, it's very provincial. So you can be in Florence and Tuscany, which is the official Italian dialect, court Italian, and then you go to somewhere like Naples or Sicily, and it's just they sound drunk. If you go to Italy a lot and you go to northern Italy and Tuscany, there's a difference with the way they speak to if you go to Naples and southern Italy, and they sound drunk. Um, the Südtirol, been there, they have a very weird. It's weird because they speak German. They, yeah, and they even Germanicize Italian names. Weird. It's so odd. It is like another world. And then you go across the border into Austria, and it's like they're speaking German, but they're not speaking German because it's Österreich is how they say Austria. They don't say because Germany is Deutschland, Austria is Österreich, the Eastern Reich, because Austria is a bit further east than Germany. Österreich basically means, I think, loosely translation as Eastern German Reich. So the East Germans basically is Austria. uh, Aust- yeah, Austria and the North Tyrol, or the Tyrolean region, which is Salzburg and all that. And then you go to the Südtirol, which is Bolzano, which is Besen in German, or the Austrian dialect. It's weird. It is so weird. And then you go to somewhere like Trieste, which used to be Austro-Hungarian until the end of World War One, with a bit of Yugoslav influence on it, and it's weird. You go there and you actually think you are in the way the central buildings look very, very um, Eastern European, like Tsarist kind of. You can see a complete difference from a piazza in mainland, or not mainland, but mainly Italy, when Trieste is this little bit on a bay next to Slovenia. You can see the change in buildings weird. So parts of Italy are strange, where you're in Italy, but you look like you're in Bavaria or you're in the Czech Republic. You think you are in a different country than you are in, and it is really odd, really odd. Um, um, Best sports movies. I'm not a massive fan of sports films, if I'm honest. Slapshot notwithstanding, out because it's Slapshot's just funny because it's not really a hockey film. It's just adult humour with a violent sport attached. It's just Goon and Slapshot are not really sports films. They're just character development films in a sense because they are comedies with serious undertones. I watch them more for character development. I will do reviews on some of my films that I've got. I've watched a lot of films, a lot of film reviews to do, and TV series to do. Um, which I've got all these films and books. I've got the other channel, and I've done what 2 or 3 film or TV reviews in 5 years, which is really poor. But no, I'm not a massive sports fan when it comes to films. Documentaries about sport is, I think, where rather than the fly on the wall ones like This Is Wrexham or Drive to Survive, I like looking at the sports documentaries, looking back at a period of time when when we're talking about a sports scandal or a player's career or whatever. So one of my favourite ones was the NHL 100th anniversary 100 greatest players documentary, which is 6.5 hours long. Yeah. And obviously that 100 greatest players list is going to be dated straight away because there's going to be another player who does a Lemieux or Gretzky and destroys the league. Um, but no, I don't like the fly on the wall ones. I'm not a massive fan of Drive to Survive and some of the HBO ones with the NHL teams or the NFL, NBA teams within the locker room. And the one about the New York Rangers when Tortorella was coach, I hated that. Laviolette was he at the? I think he was Flyers head coach, and they're in the room. That's not for me. I'm more interested in the FIFA corruption documentary or the cricket documentary that they did, where they're looking at things that are happening. I'm surprised they haven't done a Hansi Cronje one with the match fixing there. But no, I'm not a massive fan of sports films, really. I like the documentaries that aren't fly on the wall. They look at an individual player's career, or they look at a period in time in the sport. They're like the Nottingham Forest one on Netflix which was oh god, that came out a few years ago, just after the 2014 or just before the 2018. Well, it was one of the early sports documentaries on Netflix. That was really good, looking at how they built the team, how Clough comes in, build the team, they build the culture, they win the trophies, they do back-to-back European titles, and they become one of the best teams in European football for a decade. That was brilliant because they used archived footage and archived interviews because Brian Clough's been dead for over a decade, died a long time ago, and some of the players have since passed away as well, or are not in good health. So they had to use a lot of archived footage in regards to some of these players and their interviews. And yeah. The 30 for 30 on ESPN, that's dated as well because there's now 32 teams. But the guy who bought the Islanders, that was hilarious how the NHL allowed that, and he almost destroyed the team, and the league was like, we ballsed up here. Can small tennis players compete anymore? I think the shortest men's player in this is 5'10". Size shouldn't be an issue. If you've got the right skill set, you can win. It's just for height of serve, and if you're small and quick, people are saying NHL goalies, you've got to be over 6 foot now. There are some great goaltenders who are actually in the draft who are under 6 foot. So I don't buy into size is everything. You need to have speed. You need to have skill. It's not all about brute force and power. And I think that's where professional sports gone wrong in recent years. Is they're focusing too much on size and bigger is better, which is not always the case. The dude who tried to buy the Islanders, I remember that. That was at the Fisherman jersey phase. That's in the 90s, early 2000s. That was shambolic. The Islanders was a shambles from the mid 90s to the mid 2010s. They finally got some stability, but they were a mess for a very, very long time. They've had arena issues, they've had money issues, players not wanting to sign there. They've had issues in the postseason. The fact that the NHL allowed it to get to that stage was ridiculous. I think he went to prison for fraud, that owner, as well. I think he was part of a Ponzi scheme or something, or he was a confidence trick. He was definitely a fraudster, and he basically, I can't remember his name, but yeah. I do love to chew the fat, which reminds me I've actually got to go shopping in a bit. And you know what? I'm actually going to order myself a pizza tonight. I'm going to be lazy and stay and order myself. I have not had a pizza in a couple of months. I'm uh, definitely going to get myself a pizza tonight. So yeah, it's been a while since I've had a takeout. You can be too tall and table tennis and moving around the court. So yeah, like I think a lot of coaches, a lot of player scouts, talent scouts, especially when you're scouting youth players to get into a senior team, or if you've got a draft system like the North American leagues, they are going for the bigger player over the smaller player because they've got size, power, and physicality. But with certain rule changes that we've seen in certain sports, like rugby league, and the speed of the game, the big players get exposed. You've got to lug around. You've got to have good cardio to lug around that extra weight and height. So I do think with when looking at things like the NHL and the NRL with rule changes and the pace and the sports getting younger, so the average ages of squads dropping and smaller players having a space in the game, the skilled players, the small players, pace players. Yeah, sometimes big is not always better. Order a square. What was it? Al Davis moving the Raiders around. The NFL hated him. He hated them. Look, the Raiders, they've moved up to now in Vegas. The NFL, I mean, one of the reasons why the Arizona Coyotes are still in Arizona is the NHL wants stability. They don't want another relocation. Firstly, the owners don't want it because it makes them less money with relocation fees over expansion fees. So I think expansion is going to be more the direction the league takes. Secondly, it reduces stability because if that team struggles in another location, they're moving again. You've got to rejig divisions and conferences. And they don't like doing that. They like stability. Stability sells the product. This is where I think baseball, the NFL, to a sense of the NBA, have had a lot more relocations in more recent years. And when you're trying to get investors to buy in, trying to get sponsors to buy in, local sponsors, local investors, trying to establish in the market, constantly moving around, they hate that. Order a square pizza, a Polo Mamone. Okay, so I've been in Italy, and I've been to Italy a lot, and I remember one pizzeria did not do circular pizzas; they did only live in squares. So I had saved up all my pocket money and turned it to euro. We're going back 20 years, so I had about 100 euros on my entire holiday, and I was allowed to buy dinner once because we were out there. I think for 3-4 weeks. I was allowed to buy dinner. I think once a week at a restaurant or a takeout. We went to this little pizzeria in Tuscany, a place called Bagnone, um, Villa di Bagnone, which is near La Spezia. Got this little waterfall, and it's got this gorge on one side, and the little town is like a few streets. Pizzeria is tiny, and for €10, I got enough pizza to feed a family of four for a week. We didn't have to cook in the evenings for a week, and the slices were that thick. The pizza was 1 meter by 1 meter for €10. There you go. All the ingredients were local, made locally, and I actually saw them making it in the ovens, like bringing out more pizza to put on the counter in their pizzeria. Fantastic, thick, proper Italian pizza. €10. I bought enough pizza, and we were going on little walks around the valley, and then we're going on little drives to local landmarks, and we would take pack lunch boxes with pizza in it. We would have cold pizza at lunch. It was fantastic. If I was a celebrity, how would I deal with the paparazzi? Some celebrities don't have a lot of paparazzi following them around, um, which is really interesting. Um, I think people now are less interested in stuff like that than they were before. Um, People like Keanu Reeves do not have paparazzi following them around because they keep a low profile when they're out and about. They don't draw attention to themselves. So the best way to avoid drawing attention to yourself is not have all the hangers on. Don't go to the wild, after parties in London or LA or Paris or Milan or Sydney or wherever you are in the world, big city. And don't be controversial and loud and yeah, he be Keanu Reeves. Keanu Reeves is almost the stereotypical celebrity who doesn't have the I don't think he even lives in the Malibu Hills. He lives a very normal life. He has his own company. He's invested in a motorcycle company that makes motorcycles. So he's a businessman as well as an actor. He does a lot of charity. He's like Alice Cooper, musician. Does a lot of charity work at homeless shelters and food banks and soup kitchens. And the way they are away from the stage or the big screen or media events, they're just he's apparently though he's really boring. He's not. He's a very Keanu Reeves is a very interesting, very interesting. Um, um, but when the next John Wick comes out, yeah, I think there'll be a bit more interest in Keanu Reeves. But Keanu Reeves has been brilliant. He's never had a lot of controversy away from the camera. The paparazzi go after those that create controversy. That's what people go after. But Oh, Keanu Reeves. I've got some Keanu Reeves. I've got a few Keanu Reeves films here that I can do. The original Point Break, for example, is one of the best films ever. No. I've got the Matrix trilogy in here somewhere. I've got to review some films. I've got some of the John Wicks. I've got his film reviews. 'Cause I've got a lot of DVDs and books. Got a lot of books. So basically, the other channel's going to have some content soon. But no, Keanu Reeves is because, as I say, away from the camera, he doesn't have controversy. He's very polite, respectful, humble, and so therefore he's not really grabbing the attention headlines because he lives a very average life. He's not. He's not one of those who has to make a big song and dance about anything. Not a lot of controversy. Never had drug or alcohol problems. Does he follow any sport? I think Keanu Reeves is interested in sport, yes. But he's not publicly said, I'm a fan of this team, like some celebrities have to be seen at, like, Drake at any Toronto game, for example. Snoop Dogg, for example, is very famously an LA Kings fan. Snoop Dogg loves his ice hockey, and the African American or Afro Caribbean community, that's not seen as the trendy thing to do. Snoop Dogg goes, no, this is my thing. I'm from LA, I'm supporting the local team. So there's that. The Matrix has got him just like Andrew Tate. I know Tom Hanks likes Aston Villa. Tom Hanks is an interesting one. Yes, Snoop Dogg he is that random South fan, isn't he? But again, he's got a friendship with Russell Crowe, and like Russell Crowe, and the Penn family own stake in the Manly Warringah Sea Eagles. So there's a couple of NRL teams that do have American money in them, and this is that drive to, you know, get games to America. Is South Sydney and Manly have American money, and they want to use that as the basis to grow the game in the US. But no, Snoop Dogg's very interesting because yeah, he's an LA Kings fan, and he does like his rugby league, and I think what people forget about Snoop Dogg, um, he's exceptionally intelligent, but yeah, why? Because Andrew Tate is just Andrew. I mean, he looks like the guy from the Matrix who'll sell you out for a bubble gum. The guy in the Matrix is the bald guy who's also in Bad Boys as the captain. Um, yeah. I don't want to talk about Andrew Tate because giving him airtime is giving him airtime, which gives him more exposure. So fuck Andrew Tate and his brother. I hope they get done for a very, very long time for um, their offences. Um, but no, celebrities who are sports fans is weird. There's a lot of them. Justin Bieber is a massive ice hockey fan. Ryan Reynolds is a massive ice hockey fan. Snoop Dogg's a massive ice hockey fan. And all this is before they were famous. They were always, this is something that people forget. Prince William is an Aston Villa fan, which is quite interesting. Is that? I don't. I don't really want to continue talking about Andrew Tate. If I'm brutally honest. Jack Nicklaus at the Lakers. How much do they spend watching it? Well, I know Snoop Dogg actually does a segment where he does for the NHL. I forget which network, but Snoop Dogg does a lot of the stuff for the NHL, and I think that's helping grow the game to minority communities. Yeah, Snoop Dogg does a lot of stuff on social media, and he does a lot of NHL content. And I think actually Snoop Dogg does actually spend a lot of time watching. He does. The Departed is one of the best movies ever. Yeah, it's a good one. I wouldn't say it's as good as Goodfellas or The Irishman, as Scorsese films. It's up there, but it's not his best. But Jack Nicholson, Jack Nicklaus is a golfer. Jack Nicholson, the truth. You can't handle the truth. Jack Nicholson is something. I think I've done my favourite films list on the other channel, although I will have to revisit that because some new films have come out pretty good. Since I last did that, I've watched some films since I last did that list. But there's some films I can just watch over and over again. Random question, but has there ever been an athlete's death that really affected me? I remember watching Ayrton Senna die. I remember watching the Tour de France when the last death occurred in the Tour de France because I was watching that live. Christian Eriksen nearly died and upset me because I was watching that live, and my dad died of a heart attack, so that was a bit whoa. And my girlfriend at the time realised I was a bit upset, so I just walked outside and had a cigarette. I couldn't watch that, but I remember watching Mark Vivian Farr watch that live. I've watched some of them live. It's weird, but I was too young to really understand what was going on with the Ayrton Senna thing. I knew it was serious, but I didn't really understand what was going on until I was a little bit older. Ratzenberger was the day before. I didn't really understand what was going on. I didn't really understand what was going on at the time. It was 94 Ayrton Senna, yes. It was 1994 with Ayrton Senna. Kobe Bryant, I remember the news surrounding the Kobe Bryant situation, but there's been a few motorcycle and rallying accidents that I've watched where, bad. Quite bad. I remember watching the Suzuka MotoGP in 2003 where one of the last fatality. I remember watching Simoncelli. That was with Colin Edwards landing on top of Simoncelli. I remember watching that, live, um, and that was like, I think, the modern equivalent of Ayrton Senna, in that regard. I there were there Use van der Westhuizen. Yeah, he didn't die playing. He died of um, obviously his health issues, and Dottie Weir as well. They died of the same motor neurone disease condition, which was very, very it was upsetting because having watched them play, and especially used van der Westhuizen in the '95 World Cup final where he brings down Jonah Loman. He's got two broken ribs going into that game. Um, but I wouldn't say I was overly upset. I think I think some of them are shocking, but thankfully they're very, very rare. I mean, obviously we're born in an era where motorsport's a hell of a lot safer. Um, but yeah, look, Viali has, his last major moment as involved in sport was winning the Euros, and then he unfortunately dies not that much. Um, I've heard of a few uh, serious injuries. Alex McKinnon in rugby league is one. Moses Masoi is another one, rugby league, who got injured during the COVID period. Bad tackle. There's been a couple of nasty injuries with temporary or permanent paralysis. Um, but thankfully, they are again so rare. But no, I wouldn't say it's been one that's overly maybe like, oh, I'm depressed for days on end. I don't know how people get so invested with like musicians and actors and sportsmen, where they're like, oh, I can't cope because so and so. But I've seen a few live on TV, like Simon Shelley in the MotoGP, Senna and Ratzenberger. I was watching live, and yeah, they are shocking at the time they happen. But I was too young to really understand Ratzenberger and Senna's deaths and how they would actually have a massive knock-on impact in the safety of motorsport. Dale Earnhardt's death obviously was a shocking one as well. And again, it takes a couple of these big deaths to really make a change. I've seen some near deaths in sport as well. I do remember the Tour de France when there were a couple of guys were descending and they fell off the side of the road. And, we've obviously had that cyclist recently. I didn't watch the Tour de Suisse, so I can't comment on his accident. But I remember watching the 2012 Olympics, and the women's road cycling used the same course as the men's. The female who just cartwheeled over and landed on her neck and head and was seriously in a coma. And then the men's cycling race next day, Vincenzo Nibali is one of the best cyclists of his era, Tour de France winner, gold medalist, all that kind of stuff. Broke his pelvis, and he was one of like 5 or 6 um, injured. Do you remember the IndyCar driver lost both his legs? He's done touring car driving. Is it Andretti? Um, Zanardi. That's it, Zanardi. Yeah, he lost both his legs. He's still alive. And then you've got the young British driver who lost both his legs in a similar accident. And I watched that live as well. I've seen some horrific sports injuries and motorsport moments where you're like, this is Colin McRae. Well, he shouldn't have been flying that helicopter. You got David Leslie and Colin McRae both died in exactly the same way in a helicopter crash, about a couple of years apart. Um, is it any surprise Alex McKinnon happened against Melbourne? The club is never far from controversy. Look, that's a tough one. We are constantly discussing like tackle technique and the wrestle and trying to speed up the game. And Melbourne have been criticised a lot over their history, and especially in the last 15 years. And Craig Bellamy and his coaching techniques, their defensive techniques have been criticised. I don't like watching Melbourne win. Um, But I just don't like Melbourne. I don't like the style of play that they play, and has that been partly influenced by the media? Maybe. I mean, there's some great players who play for Melbourne. I want to see do well, but I just don't like it when the Storm win. But the Alex McKinnon situation, I wouldn't say they invented them all, but they definitely perfected them all. I think that's the better way to look at it. They didn't invent them all; they perfected it. So at that time, a lot of teams were trying to slow the tackle area down. They just were the best at doing it, so that's why they get highlighted. I wouldn't say they were the first team to do this or that. They just seem to work out, we're good at this. Other teams are a bit more haphazard at this, but they just got really good at doing it really well. The one that I don't like particularly, I mean, I think the hip drop is a grey area. The crush is horrible. I hate that. But then the tackles player stop players backing in. Players have really, if they're going to turn their bodies, offload quick. Stop backing in. They don't offload, and so therefore they get stuck in that seated position. So the crusher is sometimes brought on by the tackle player backing in. I just go straight at them. If you have no intention of offloading, just run straight and hard. You can't get done with the crusher then because you will either get dump tackled or you'll end up going forward. You won't end up in that position. The cannonball's a horrible one because that's just how you destroy knees. The chicken wing, that's jujitsu. And that's come into the that I've been chicken winged before in a play fight. I was sparring with a couple of mates, and I tell you now, um, yeah, not on my list of things to do on a regular basis. Just have my rotary cuff torn and my shoulder dislocated on a permanent basis, and just my collarbone broken. Don't want to do that on a regular basis. It's painful. Um, so I've had that done to me, and that is brutal. It's horror. Yeah, that's an MMA technique that should not be in rugby league. That is not rugby league. Some of the crusher. A lot of the onus also is on they say on the tackling players. Make sure you bring the tackle, but the attacking player, the player with the ball turning their back, you open yourself up for being turned into an accordion. I'm sorry. You have no intention of, and I know you want to encourage the offload, but don't back into tackles. Just go hard and straight. If they're tackling low, you've got your arms free. If you're running at pace, you've got your arms free. So I don't like when players back in. They've got to get that out of the game as well. The hip drop, I remember they experimented in the last round of 21 season when their players took suspension of 5 weeks as part of the trial. They may have been the first team caught, but yeah, there's a lot of people accusing the Melbourne Storm of doing that. They just happen to slow the game down better. I don't think individual players want to go out and injure because they've got to practice that. If someone is suggesting that they are actually bringing these techniques into play, they're doing it in training. And I can't think of a player who wants to actively injure his teammate in training unless they really hate that guy. But I would argue that was the first player suspended for it. That doesn't mean it wasn't happening before. I remember when Parramatta played 2007 prelim final, brought in the chicken wing for that game, did it on Hayne Kane. Jared Hayne couldn't have happened to a better player. Sorry, not a massive fan of Jared Hayne, but hey, that's when you, as a Parramatta fan, saw it. The wrestling's been coached in the game for about 20, 25 years since the NRL became a thing. I do think we need to look at some of the tackle techniques and go, do we actually need MMA, mixed martial arts kind of techniques in the game? Can we just have a proper tackle where you put the player on his arse, or the attacking player dominates that tackle and ends up on his front? Can we not just go back to having normal tackles, please? Because we are seeing players with really. It's not. Mark Riddle's interview on the bloke at the bar. He said, 2007 preseason, they brought in a wrestling coach because they got wind of in Melbourne doing it for years. Again, just obviously these tackles were in the game, and then obviously Melbourne have gone, let's do it better than everyone else. If we're not getting pinged for it, let's do it better than everyone else. Um, but I think it's more notable over the last decade that every team's doing it now. Um, and when Melbourne are on the receiving end of it, they kick off and scream and cry. But they have dished out some dirty. Um, well, the thing is, you look at some of the Wayne Bennett, Craig Bellamy connection does go back actually to Canberra. Um, but uh, for me, I don't like the wrestle being in the game at all. It's completely unnecessary, and you are going to get retaliatory challenges because I don't think you in order to do this you've got to do it in training against each other. And there's that likelihood of getting injured in training. Okay, so suddenly you've lost your star fullback, you've lost your star half 5'8", your star hooker because you've been told in training, right, you've got to do this, and they get it wrong and they hurt themselves. And then so I don't like it. I know Craig Fitzgibbon, for example, is a jiu-jitsu nut. He does a whole jiu-jitsu session on his by himself before even going into coach or going to the coach's box that day. So Craig Fitzgibbon was playing at the time before the wrestling coaches were. So I think it was already in the game as individual players taking jiu-jitsu or karate classes, or maybe going down a gym and taking up a wrestling class or whatever. Um, but I do think we need to get it out of the game. How we do that, either you ban coaching setups and clubs for having wrestling coaches and martial arts coaches, or you bring in tough punishment. Um, the salary cap scandal is a bit more complicated than I think any of us will ever know. But they're not the only club to have been involved in a salary cap breach. The Bulldogs, the Eels, the whole shebang. So, um, but we do need to reward the tackler for a dominant tackle, and we also need to reward the attacker for breaking through and dominating the tackler. So, but we need to tidy that up. The speed of the game will massively improve drastically. You wouldn't need a six again because the wrestle's out of it. I think there's no incentive. They need to again. Yeah, they do need to reward a one-on-one dominant tackle or a legs tackle. Um, um, at the same time, you don't want to discourage offloading play and expansive attacking play. So you've got to strike a balance, but they need to get the wrestle completely out of the game. Um, well, Melbourne, where the cheating is a badge of honour. What is interesting, okay, for me as a rugby league fan, is that Cooper Cronk works for Fox, and the rest of those star players work for Channel 9. I'm not so sure how friendly Cooper Cronk is with his former teammates, both Queensland and Melbourne. Um, I'm not so sure how friendly Cronky is with Cameron Smith and Billy Slater. Um, because obviously, yeah, he went to South Sydney and he finished his career with another club, but I'm not so sure how friendly Cooper Cronk is. Um, whether Melbourne wear it as a badge of honour, they wear it as, we with that we feel are justifiably persecuted. But Parramatta was a shambles. The Warriors have done it. The Bulldogs did it. The minor breaches are ridiculous. I think that's the agenda. I think the media has been peddling for a long time, and then on social media there are enough people that I think it's a lot more complicated than 2017 and 2019. They'd already been done for the salary caps. You mean 2007 and 2009? They'd already been punished by that point. Um, I think in regards to Cronk and Smith, it's interesting that one's gone through Channel 9 and one's gone on to Fox. I don't think they liked each other when they were still at the Storm. I think Cooper Cronk wanted to actually say something about the salary cap scandal and some of the other goings on within that organisation, and I think they were basically not. I think Cooper Cronk is the most likely, if interviewed off the record, to actually open up that era. um, I do feel for some of those players who were part of that Melbourne Storm team, who were on the lower end of salaries, who weren't involved with the double contracts and then the management side of it, who put their heart and soul into playing in that period of time, who have had their moment ruined, um, and their legacy tainted. And I think that's where, um, yeah, I think there is. I think you're not going to like everyone you play with or against, and obviously they played a lot together through club and Origin and national team. But I don't think they're their best. You can see they're not the best of friends. They obviously, yeah. I mean, um, but by God, Cooper Cronk. He's one of my favourite players. He's one of the few players who's played for the Melbourne Storm I actually like, and I, you know, um, what he's done for the game. You know, it's fantastic, and but I was never a fan of Cameron Smith. There's something about Cameron Smith I just don't. Yeah, there's I don't know, but Billy Slater. Okay, I wasn't a fan of Billy Slater because he was always, winning where my teams were losing at the time. But Billy Slater actually does come across as quite a well-spoken individual and quite a likable character now that he's retired. But how can you get into it more? Obviously, I pay £140 a year to watch the NRL on the NRL website. But we're now post Origin period now. But if you want to watch the women's NRLW, that starts in next week. So NRL.com, sign up for a membership. You get to watch all the men's games, all the women's games, all the Origin games, some of the internationals, not all of them, and all the related media. I think that's the best way you're going to get into it, is to watch it. And it's not that expensive. You've got to spare 140 quid a year, or do the yearly package. Do not do the monthly or weekly. It's not worth it. It's too expensive. It doesn't work out as well. It costs you more. Do the yearly package, and you're going to get every game, every pre-season game, all the off-season stuff, all the programming. It's fantastic. The documentaries. NRL.com. That's how you can watch it more. And I think it will give you a better understanding of the game. Watch the women's NRLW. The rules are slightly different. They have shorter halves. They're having the 40-20. They got the 30. Is it the 30-50? But that's a good way to get into it. Cameron Smith. There's no doubt Cameron Smith redefined the role of the number 9, and he could also play in the halves occasionally as an emergency. He did, and his longevity. He wasn't the best player coming through the age grades, and he wasn't the first choice reserve grade hooker when he was called up. They just had injuries at the time. He was thrown into the team, um, and very very quickly he was established himself, and then the rest is history. But unfortunately, there are things surrounding the GOAT. People will call him. Some people do say he's the GOAT. I don't think he's the best player of all time, personally. But for games played, first grade games played in Australian history, he's the GOAT, but he's not the GOAT, in my opinion. Um, he did redefine the number 9 role, but I'm not a fan I'm not a fan. Yes, Billy Slater. Yeah, they did. They have now changed the rules around trying to stop with your leading with your legs. Um, but that was within the rules at the time, and he was doing it. Every fullback was doing it. He just happened to hurt some players doing it, and that wasn't necessarily. But that's how he was coached, and they had to change the rules because players got injured. He's not the only player to do it, or is still doing it. I don't think he would coach it now as a coach. I think as a younger player, he did do it. But um, do I follow the team? I'm a Canberra Raiders. I like the Raiders. Um, Josh Schuster. He's fat. He's lazy. He's overweight. He's lazy. He's got an overinflated ego and he's being overpaid. There is no doubt he has got skill there. His work ethic sucks. Um, he yeah, no, he's going to be a bust. It's all to do with his attitude. His attitude is all wrong. It's a privilege, not a right, to be a professional athlete, and he's coming across as an entitled. I'm here. They've got other halves coming through, and I had just signed Arthur's son to come over from Parramatta because I think they don't think Schuster's good enough. They've got Cooper Johns there. They've got other players who can play his role and are more consistent when they get called up. So I can't see him staying there long term. Um, he was out. He'd not tapped his bat in the crease, so technically he's out. Yes, if he ducked, walked forward, then put his bat down, and then walked out again, he's in. But he had done that to another player previously, and his coach, Brendan McCullum, when he was playing, has done it as well. So he was out, technically, yes. Was it the right way to get him out? Well, if you're going to be that dopey at that level, you deserve to be out. But what pro who? Prozenzo Vids would have a heart attack if I said that about Schuster being absolute shit. He's overrated. He's not fit. He's overweight. His attitude stinks. He's got a sense of entitlement about him. Great handling skills and great ability, but he's an overrated player. When you meet a sports person you don't like, does that make you want them to lose? They say don't meet your heroes. As a player, Freddie Flintoff did on the field when I was obviously a young kid growing up watching cricket was fantastic. Met him in real life, can't stand him. Think he's actually, you know, not a nice character. What Parenzo, sense of entitlement, bad attitude. I don't even know who the Parenzo Vids is. Please tell me he's a YouTuber. I have no idea who this guy is. No, I do think attitude has a long way to go. If you are skill deficient or you've got some issues, if you have the right attitude, you can overcome that. I don't think Schuster got his fitness. He's always injured. He's clearly got some. I think it's what people like go Latrell Mitchell. He's a fantastic player. He is a fantastic player. He's also overweight. Latrell Mitchell is at least a stone and a half overweight. And and again, he's another season riddled with injury. So if Latrell Mitchell lost a bit of weight, he would be unstoppable because his pace would improve, his cardio would improve. Latrell Mitchell, you can see he's carrying timber. He's got a gut. If Latrell Mitchell lost a stone and a half of weight and toned up a bit, my God, he would be far more dangerous than he is and fitter than he is. Right, Parenzo Vid's gonna have to give him a look out and give him some grief. Oh, he's a Manly fan. That explains it. Nick Kyrgios, bad attitude, general bit of both. I think more attitudes than general arsehole. I think actually occasionally he comes across all right when he's interacting with his fans or younger fans, but when it comes to general, yeah, he comes across as again his attitude's a bit. Um, do I think when Djokovic finally retires, he'll be appreciated more? I think we can appreciate what he's done in the sport playing, but don't have to necessarily like all champions. I think he knows he's not there to be liked. Um, I think he comes across as a very unlikable character, but he's very driven. You've got to be driven. You're not gonna always going to make a lot of friends playing sport. You can be like a certain player, a gentlemanly player who wins the occasional trophy here or there, or the occasional, in team sports, occasional Player of the Year award. And like, but it's all about how you conduct yourself, I think. And when things aren't going right and there are controversial call, it's how you conduct yourself. And it's how you conduct yourself dealing with officials, the media before and after, how you conduct yourself um, in regards to a whole range of issues. If it was Nick from Australia and Parenzo is in the same video, actually, Nick, is that Nick? Is that other rugby league guy who's a Gold Coast Titans fan? Um, Nick, Nick. Oh, it was Nick from Australia and Parenzo Vids on the same video. Actually, they did a video about me. Uh, oh God, so he's a two-header. Oh dear. Oh, the inbreeding. I'm using humour because obviously the New South Wales Queensland banter is north of the Tweed. They've all got two heads, and south of the Tweed they've all piss heads. Joke, isn't it? Yeah, I think I don't understand why two Aussies want to attack an English or British rugby league YouTuber. Like, I don't understand that. Like, your content's slightly different, same sport but slightly different. I do not understand the why, but that's a thing. Like, have they lost some subscribers to you or something? Yeah, it's one of those mornings South Wales for sports and Queensland hates Queensland State of Origin. Why you support the North? Why would someone support the North Queensland Cowboys but hate Queensland State of Origin and live in New South Wales? That one is a bit of a. Are you sure you're well? Unless he's a bit of a Jonathan Thurston fan. Jonathan Thurston used to play for Cadbury. Like I don't understand why like two Australian rugby league YouTubers want to personally attack a British rugby league. I don't get that. Like, how is that benefiting anyone? Because they look stupid, and then you're going to come back and can a team outside Leeds at St Helens ever win the title? What in what regard? What this season? Yeah, I think so. But it's happened before, but unfortunately, the way the, the, the sport is at the moment, with finances and it's a bit it's harder. But Challenge Cup, it's been done, and Catalan, I think, could be the catalyst to do it, where we get the first team outside of England to win the Super League. Because I uploaded a public video back when you want me to take it down. I said no. He then did that thing about it. I think Catalans can definitely win it. They can close it. Yeah, Catalan, I think, have definitely got the pieces in place to start winning a lot. They've won a Challenge Cup. They got close a couple of years ago. Yeah, they can do it. Like, because you re-uploaded a video he did making fun of another fan base because he sounds like a really nice individual. You put it on a social media platform, which is a re-upload, so you've shared it, and so he's got more attention by you sharing it, and now he wants to abuse you because he's getting more site traffic on his channel. I don't get this. Doesn't matter if it's good or bad. He's suddenly getting a lot more attention on his channel. The algorithm is going to say, we're going to push your content. You're going to make more ad revenue. So he's just shot himself in the foot by. Personally, should you have done it? Possibly not. In hindsight, you would probably deal with that differently. But Guy comes across as a bit of a moron, really. Who are the best team in New South Wales? Yeah, the Roosters have won the most. Historically, it is Rabbitohs. Roosters are second. So yeah, it is Souths historically, but Easts more recently. Yes, we're going official titles: Eastern Suburbs and Southern Suburbs. So there we go. So the Rabbitohs and the Roosters historically are the two best teams anyway. The Roosters in more recent times have won a lot. Um, However, they're on both sides. I think are about to go over precipice downwards. I don't think the Rabbitohs look as good this year, and I don't. The Roosters are all over the place. Um, Yeah, well, again, historically, things have obviously the sports evolved. Teams have merged, teams have been thrown out of comps. Competitions change. We had the Super League war. Don't get me wrong, I love the sport, but the sport has a lot of issues that it is not dealing with very well, and the money side of it and how the revenues are distributed over in Australia and the CBA negotiations, and then we got obviously Europe, the Super League, and the lack of money, the poor TV deal, and the poor promotion of the sport, and say the sport's got problems. Um, well, I wouldn't say the Bears were terrible. The Newtown Jets gave it a crack, and then they were thrown out. The Magpies were always hopeless. Cronulla had their moments, and Penrith were they underachieved. Um, you missed out Glebe. There you go. You missed out the Glebe. The rising full of Glebe. Yeah. No. As I say, like, there's a reason why. As a content creator, sports blog, and create videos yourself. British guy reacts to things. Um, I do create my own content. That's what I'm doing now. I I, I like the format the channel. Both my channels have. They're basic, they're simple, none of these flashy bangs. I'm not taking other people's content. I do my own research. I couldn't care less what other people, other channels would say about me. Do I live stream on the other channel? I need to post a little bit more content on the other channel. I'm going to do some more content on the other channel. I think I need to do a bit more content on the channel, to be honest. I don't know how I would structure a live stream on the other channel. I think there's a lot going on politically at the moment. There's a lot of topics in regards to the writers' strike in Hollywood. That's a big thing. I need to cover that. There's definitely issues within the film and TV industry and the streaming industry as well, within the industry, the arts and entertainment industry that are bubbling. There's been a lot of TV show and streaming show cancellations. There's a lot of actors out of work. There's a lot of writers out of work. And there's been some really bad films being released. I watched a western last night, and it was a weird film, really weird. Um, like the videos that pop up in the Time American reaction. I hate them. I hate them. Cannot stand them. They're so unoriginal now. Loads of channels are doing it. Can't stand them. Uh, Really, they what I don't know why I subscribe. So they just stop aggravating me. I hate them. Hate them. I hate those reaction videos because they rely on someone else's content to make content. They can't come up with anything original. It's I don't stop getting annoyed, aggravated. Don't like it. It's not original. It's not original. Um, my view on that. I don't like the predicted team list videos from rugby. Well, that's a difficult one in my opinion. Again, that's more clickbaity. Yeah, that's a clickbaity thing because you're relying on hearsay and this and that. I could come up with my all-time NRL starting 13 with interchange bench, and I can come up with my all-time, Super League starting and interchange bench 13. But yeah, because each list is subjective. So if I was to go right, my all-time rugby league all-star team. I can only go from the period of around 1993 onwards. So that great Parramatta side, that great Manly side of the 80s, I would have like one player from that team in my all-star team squad, like in that conversation. And because it's subjective, there's always going to be someone, oh, why have you not missed out this player? Why? And there's always going to be someone unhappy in the comment section. Um, and I would have to get the whiteboard out for that. And I would have to move things around in the flat and adjust things. I must be doing that side actually. So there's that. Yeah, I certain lists are subjective in regards to putting up favourite team lists or who I think subjective because look at this week. Ben Travojevic has gone down with a muscle injury, another hamstring injury with the Travojevic brother. Who knew? There must be something genetic there. So he would have been in the team for this coming game. Goes down injured out for 3 weeks. They're saying the Trell Mitchell's going to be back for the next game, maybe a game after. Is he though? Are they? Then you've got Josh Adokar's gone off injured today in state of origin with a hamstring strain. How much time is he going to miss for Canterbury? Although they didn't need him last weekend in their win, and they've got a good couple of young wingers at the club. I don't like these predicted team lists and things like that. You can look at rosters and salary cap management. Go, this is their top 30, and this is their under those young players and reserve grade players on the fringe who are also part of the elite squad training. And you go, right, this is where their salary cap's at, and discuss your best team out of what they've got there. But yeah, I don't predicted lineups and things like that is very clickbaity, and it's not, it's subjective as well. Dirty Harry, are you feeling lucky, punk? It's a Magnum 45. And all the shooting, I kind of forgot how much I shot. I shoot 5 or 6. Well, punk, you feeling lucky? Well, are you? You feeling lucky, punk? Yeah, no, I do a very good Clint Eastwood when I can bother, but I can't be bothered to do a Clint Eastwood impersonation right now. It's too early in the day, and I'm not half asleep. And again, Billy Trump, yes. Well, they're both Republican. Clint Eastwood is actually one of the few registered Republicans in Hollywood. Just thought I'd drop that out there. Clint Eastwood was one of the few Republican supporters in the Film Actors Guild. Democrats. I just thought I'd drop that one in there. Like, oh, you're feeling lucky, punk. Oh, yeah. Well, all the chaos I've heard. Well, he is nearly 100. He's like mid-90s. He's old. He's not a young'un. He's nearly 100 years old. He's not doing bad. He's still directing. This is the thing. Like, Clint Eastwood, like, he's been going for 7, 8 decades. He's been involved in. I think he started. He's got a very similar backstory to Roger Moore in his when he first gets his break in acting. I think he started out as a model. Um, yeah, Tim Allen and Dana White. Dana White is not really Hollywood. He's just a moron. And Tim Allen, he's a complex character from some of his. Clint Eastwood is very American. Although he has spent a lot of time in the UK, he's very, very American. But what is ironic is Tim Allen and Clint Eastwood aren't Trump supporters. I think they are registered Republicans, and there's reasons for that. But Tim Allen is very controversial with some of his drug convictions back in the day. He's lucky he didn't go to prison for a very, very long time. In the 70s and 80s, he was before he made Home Improvement. He was very lucky that Tool Time, yeah, Home Improvement. I grew up watching that program. It's so dated now. So dated. One of the few sitcoms set in Detroit, by the way. And this is at a time when Detroit as a city is in a bad bad place. But the Red Wings are doing quite well. They're one of the few successful teams to come out of Detroit is the Detroit Red Wings. So if you're a sports fan from Detroit, you've had a long time suffering. But it's very noticeable that the Detroit Red Wings, you see his kids wearing the jerseys, you hear him talking about the Red Wings as a thing. Um, so there's that. I believe Clint Eastwood is a sports fan, yes. I'm going to have to do my research on Clint Eastwood, but damn good actor, a damn good director. He's actually a very interesting human being. Look, if I had the opportunity, I would love to sit down with Clint Eastwood and just talk society, life, and all sorts, because he's a very interesting character. But very similar origin to how he got into acting is via modelling. He also started out on I believe he was a soap opera actor originally. He started out on the TV in some bit part roles, and then he ended up being cast in what one of the westerns. While the Red Wings called Hockey Town. Why? Gordie Howe. The, why is Detroit called Hockey Town? They were one of the original six. Gordie Howe, and a lot of the player awards are named after ex-Detroit players, like the Ted Lindsay, for example. Without Ted Lindsay, you don't have the NHLPA Players Association. You don't have a collective bargaining agreement, and they have a load of the original Hall of Famers come from Detroit, and then they started winning again in the more modern era, and on with Eiserman and that great Red Wings team with Osgood and at the time it was a piece of marketing that worked really really well because it's obviously known as Motown, uh, Motor City. So it's a little bit of a play on Motown, Hockey Town. It's a very good piece of marketing by the Red Wings organisation and the NHL at the time, because Detroit is not known for its success on the sporting field. And then the Red Wings gave the city something to be proud about at a time when the city was really not in a good place economically. And when the team was struggling in the 70s and 80s, the city of Detroit was struggling in the 70s and 80s. Um, and they brought a lot of positivity to Detroit at a time when the city has really struggled. Um, and yeah, they've been outside the playoffs for a little while now, but they did bring a lot of positivity to a city that's had a lot of social issues, a lot of unemployment, high crime, deprivation. A lot of Detroit's had a lot of problems, and the Red Wings brought a lot of joy to a city that was in a very bad place. Um, a team that loses all the time, is there any point in watching them? I seem to remember East Fife in Scotland like had back-to-back relegations and only won like 4 games in 2 years or something. Is there any point? Um, if you can't stick through the tough times, you're not a true fan. If you cannot stick with your team when things aren't going great, don't deserve to be there when things turn around. San Marino's international thing, that's different. When we get to clubland and we're talking about the Newcastle Knights for those 3 straight wooden spoons, or the West Tigers, their fans keep turning up and the team is atrocious. They really are. I think if you can't stick with your team when the team sucks, you don't deserve to be there when the team wins. So there's that. Oh, the West Tigers turn it around. Apparently, Justin Holbrook is linked with a potential move there as a head or assistant coach. I think the hierarchy and the Tim Sheens experiment may not be working. So if Tim Sheens is not coaching there next year, they might bring Holbrook in and move on from the Benji Marshall experiment. Or they might put, if Justin Holbrook is available, he might end up getting snapped up by someone like the Roosters as an assistant, or he might get another head coaching gig. We shall see. But I think getting Des Hasler in at the Titans is a good move. When a team will never win. Oh God, Jesus. Bloody hell. Well, that's Crystal Palace then. Crystal Palace have never won a major trophy. They've come close. That is basically just describe Brighton and Crystal Palace. You got close to winning some silverware, but not quite doing it. Bloody hell, and I'm saying that with love. They're both Premier League sides, and they're very good Premier League sides. Team will never win. I'm gonna have to do small club histories because there are some teams that never win games. Well, then we have to look at like leagues with no. Oh, like the Cleveland Browns, like going like was it 2 whole years without winning a game or something in the NFL? There are some teams that really have been badly, but most of those are in like leagues where there's no promotion relegation, so the North American league system. Yeah, there's some bad teams there. There's some teams that have sucked for a long time, and they have been badly run. Like the Detroit Lions just cannot win. They can't even make playoffs. Um, for a long time, Buffalo have sucked. They're finally on the cusp. They were close to making playoffs this year. But the Buffalo Sabres, I mean, there's some Buffalo Sabres fans who've never seen the team make the playoffs. Am I a proud Savarino national? Would I watch? If that was my national side and I could afford to go, then yeah, I'll go. Um, but yeah, if we're talking about teams losing, yeah, San Marino have a shocking record at international level in football, but then there's some club teams in the major leagues in the US, Canada that really suck, and then there's some teams in the AFL and NRL in Australia that really suck. Um, and then you, uh, um, so there are, I mean, and then there is things called mismanagement, and well, you say that, but there are some national teams that have overachieved for their small population size and have gone through periods where they suck. And some national teams have sucked for a long time and suddenly get good again. And there are some other international setups where they should be a lot better than they actually are. Um, so, and you could argue that apart from Spain in the late 2000s, early 2010s, Spain sucked internationally. They had a stacked team and couldn't win. Italy have been all over the place for a while now. They've won, they've lost, they've won, they've not qualified, they've qualified. I mean, I don't know what's going on with Italy and their national setup. Um, then you look at some countries that have had success in the past and are really like Germany have declined massively, and they've got a massive player base and some of the most successful clubs in Europe in European club history, and some well supported clubs and a production of talent. And at national level, at the international level, recent tournaments, Germany's all over the place. Um, I would say Liechtenstein are quite good as well, and as are Luxembourg for nations with smaller populations. They did quite well. But you know, you could argue Iceland for their population size and the lack of professional teams and professional athletes. They did quite well. Iceland for me would be because Iceland's only got a population of about 400,000. I mean, Iceland's the population size is smaller than oh shit, what's the urban? It's like smaller than Southampton, Bristol. Yeah, Iceland's got a tiny population. Um, I think Newcastle's got more people than Iceland, so that's thinking. Um, Gold Coast Suns, they get the best players, never made the finals. Um, yeah, I mean, look, the AFL have definitely backed their expansion teams in on the eastern side of Australia with the Gold Coast Suns and the Greater Western Sydney, which is basically Canberra, but they've definitely doubled down on uh, putting a lot of support behind their expansion franchises on the east coast and on the eastern side of Australia, and you could argue they've been a bit more aggressive in their expansion than the NRL have in theirs because they've decided not to go to safe locations. They've decided to go to rugby league country and take it to them. Why do many athletes exaggerate their physique like height? You can't exaggerate your height. If you're quite tall, you're quite tall. If you're short, you're quite short. If you're bulky, you're bulky. I think overdoing it in the gym, I think is the best way to describe that. Like overdoing it, gym wise, bulk. Oh, when they're like, oh, on the tail of the tape, when they're like, oh, this player, special. I've noticed that in the North American leagues when it comes to the draft, this player is listed as 6 foot. It's basically to say I'm not a small player because what, as I said, um, yeah, there's been a few players in the NHL draft who've been listed as 6 foot when actually you look at them, they're about 5'10". Um, Players and their agents are concerned that they're not going to get picked in the draft or signed on free agency, or they're going to get stuck in the minors, for example, because of their size. What we've seen though is the speed of the game increase rapidly, and there is a place for smaller players, but there is a bias for picking players over 6 foot in the NHL and NFL drafts, for example. So some players do exaggerate their height a little bit, so they get picked to improve their chances of going and getting picked early on, and their chances of making camp in their first season and not lingering in the minors. Yeah, like there is definitely a bias in going after the bigger players because the NHL especially, is going for big is better, um, and smaller players are seen as they can't handle the physicality, which is a load of BS because there's some small players who check hard um, and do are very great players. But the way that the game is sped up and the speed of the game now, you can be a smaller player in ice hockey, for example, and do really well. But general managers and scouts tend to look for bigger players because they're NHL really like. I think a lot of professional sports are going like big is better now. So you see, football goalkeepers, they're all massive now. Ice hockey goalkeepers, they're all massive now. Rugby players, the wingers are massive now when they used to be small. Like if you're like under 6 foot now as a winger, you're considered small, which is ridiculous because the wingers used to be some of the smallest players on the field. That's a rugby league thing that's transitioned to rugby union, although Jonah Lomu did sort of say, hey, I'm like 18 stone of winger. He could be playing league as an interchange forward, but I'm playing union and I'm going to flatten a guy who's 5'8" on the wing easily. Um, um, but there is definitely, with the growth of professionalism in sports and fitness and nutrition, and there is a definite trend for players getting bigger, which means the collisions are more brutal, which means the injuries are more brutal. There is still a space for smaller players in the game, smaller skilled players. And there are some smaller players in height who actually are quite built, who are still 16, 17 stone winger. Like there are a couple of NRL wingers who are like 5'8" to 5'10" who actually will run you over because they're built like a bowling ball. But Wendell Sailor, Lottie Takiri, they're two of the wingers I look at from the 90s, 2000s, changed the dynamic on the wing. Jonah Lomu in rugby union changes the dynamic on the wing. Banahan, for example, is another massive winger. He was almost 7 foot. He was built like a second row. So there are some giant wingers. And now you've got fullbacks who are like 6'4", wingers who are like 6'4" average. So you're um, Liam Williams. Oh, not Liam Williams. What's his name? Williams. The short Shane Williams. He was like 5'6", and your Greg Laidlaw's at scrum half because they're the exception. Like Darcy Graham is, I think, one of the few. Gion Aplon is another one. Very few wingers and outside backs now and fullbacks are small. Well, would I bug up? Would I? No. I've already got knee problems and I don't want to increase my height. My knees are already shot. I mean, why would you do that to yourself? Like, there's commitment to the cause and wanting to do it at all costs, and then there's like I'm now damaging my health levels, which a lot of athletes have done, be it intentionally or not intentionally, or their coaches or professional teams have done it. But I don't see this obsession with size is everything in sport. Like bigger's better. You've got to have really good cardio. Then, if you're going to be like a Jonah Lomu size winger, you've got to have some cardio. Um, you've got some bulk to move. Um, and I was watching State of Origin today, and some of the big lads were exhausted. And the intensity of State of Origin today was not at the pace of Game 1 or Game 2. And there were players out on their feet who just were done, absolutely done. So size is not everything. If you're a big bloke, that's a lot of timber you've got to move around. Um, that's a lot of extra cardio, and you're going to tire quicker. So I don't understand why someone would want to have, a procedure done that's very, very, very unnecessary and kind of complications to make themselves look taller. That is absolutely ridiculous. And I think we need to look at athlete welfare. We do. We have to. We have to start looking at some of these sports and going, some of these young up and coming athletes are taking exceptional health risks to make it to the elite level, which they don't need to take. Unfortunately, some coaches have got into this mindset, and some scouts and general managers got into this mindset: bigger is better. So it is very dangerous. And then you've got athletes who are deliberately bulking up using anabolics. That you know, it's stupid. For a career that's going to be so short, to risk your health even before you've reached the top level unnecessarily, when there are athletes out there who are trying to manage health conditions, who haven't had to do this, by the way. That is just so unnecessary, but the rewards are so great. But if you miss out, so few players make it to that top level. You but we've got to start, looking at athlete welfare, and especially younger athletes in team sports, individual sports, as they're coming through the ranks, the grades, the age levels, and making sure that they are looked after. Because we are talking about some very, I remember when I was at school, they were telling some of my school, not really friends, but kids in my year, the year below, when they're playing rugby, bulk up, bulk up, bulk up. Out of my time at school, there's only a handful that are professional rugby players now. I dread to think the health issues that some of these lads are going to have in the years to come. And they were really big on it, but bulk up, bulk up. And I swear, some of these lads going down the gym were not just on the protein shakes. I know for a fact there were one of them I bumped into after I left school. He admitted to being on the steroids. There was another lad I went to school with, and I bumped into him a few years back now, but this is well after school. And he was skinnier than me at school, and now he's ridiculous. And I was like, I've not seen you for. And I was like, he's on steroids, like straight up. And the guy, I was actually at a work thing. I was just getting lunch. I was with a work colleague, and he was training me, and he knew him. I said, "How do you know him?" I said, "I went to school with him." I said, "When he was at school, he was skinnier than me." And he was like, "Yeah, no, he's definitely hit the roids." And he admitted, "Yeah, no, he's hit the roids." So, and I'm thinking he was quick. This kid was rangy. He was quick. He was skinny, but he was quick. He was manoeuvrable. Great footwork as a rugby player, as a football player. He was always a winger because he could just run past you. You couldn't barely tackle him. He was so quick, such rangy pace. He was really quick. And obviously, he went to whatever the next senior school, and clearly at school he's pumped himself full of steroids, and now he can barely, like that. And I'm thinking his body frame was smaller than mine. Like he clearly looked unhealthy, as in too much muscle mass. He was so top heavy. He skipped leg day, obviously, but from his waist upwards, it was just wrong. Like you could see it was physically he's been on the steroids. And I'm thinking to myself, really? You've done that to yourself? Why? Like, um, So I was just stunned by that, absolutely stunned. Um, but I know it happens at youth level, both league and union, because they're not really testing at youth level. Now, these kids bulk up really, really quick. So when they're like 16 and they're getting scouted for that, the under 16, under 18, when they hit 16, 17, and they're on the verge of when you're 18, you can now make your debut in first grade. They've had to have some exceptions to the rule. I think there have been some 16 and 17-year-olds who've debuted in rugby league, but the club have to go to the governing body and we have special dispensation so this kid can play at 16, 17. Rankins won, who's in the NRL now. He was in Super League for a while, but he started out at West Tigers. I think he's a Parramatta backup in the halves. He's had a lot of injuries. Suoliti's another one. They tried to get dispensation, but he was only allowed to start at 18, although he was allowed to train with the first team squad at 17. James Graham actually debuted at 17 for St Helens. So there's been, and I think Burgess, one of the Burgess brothers, they tried to get dispensation. I think it was Slamming Sam, and I think he debuted just after his 18th birthday. So they've tried to get some young lads to play rugby league. Union, I think, is the same. There's been a couple of debutants still in their teenage years. What they do, because they're not being tested at youth level, is they pump themselves for roids, bulk themselves up. Oh, the Vinopolas are massive, absolutely massive. Same with the Tuolagis. They're just genetic freaks. They don't need steroids. But no, I do know it's an ongoing thing. There's been allegations about. You look at some of these under 20s, like some of these, and I've seen it online about how these saplings are so big, and a lot of them are saying anabolic steroids. Because there was a scandal involving a handful of players that they've got test results. There is definitely, I know for a fact that a lot of these young kids at school and in the academies are taking supplements that aren't protein shakes and food supplements. I know they are taking. It's a known fact. It's a badly kept secret that at youth level, especially in both codes of rugby. And I think ice hockey to a certain extent as well. They're pumping themselves full of growth hormone and EPO and other nandrolone and all sorts to bulk up. And especially when they're growing, because when you're in your teenage years, you're still growing. Once you've actually hit your normal, you've done your growth spurt, then it's different. But it tricks the body into growing faster in adolescence. Ultimately, it leads to massive health issues down the line. Bronson Sherry in rugby league, he was known. It was a badly kept secret before he was actually caught by the testers that he'd been doping since he was 15, 16. He's allowed to. I think he's back. I think who's he going to be playing for in 2024? He's back in the NRL next year. He's been signed for next year, but Bronson Sherry was doping himself for years. It so happened he was playing for Cronulla, and he obviously had his a team that had been involved in the peptide scandal. It was another bad set of press for Cronulla. He's suspended, but the club culture is different now at Cronulla than what it was before. Sherry signed for Canterbury. He's unrepentant about what he did. Apparently, he'd been doping since he was 15 or 16. So, Bronson Sherry, I mean, it's a shame that Hudson Young got caught, and he's very repentant in the sense that he was unaware that what he was doing was wrong and he was led down a bad path. And he put his hands up and said, "Look, we need to educate our young players better." And I love Hudson Young as a Raiders fan because he's a feisty little character. He really has no quit in him. But now Bronson Sherry, personally, I don't think he should play again. I think, but hey, but then you had the Shandor situation, and he was allowed to come back, and it ruined his career. To be fair, and he was thrown under the bus. But Bronson Sherry, I mean, come on, that to me, you know, if the fact he's unrepentant, I wouldn't feel comfortable as a fan or as a player playing alongside him, knowing that, or playing against him, because that to me, he's cheating another young player out. Uh, I wouldn't say the Bulldogs are completely toxic, but they've had some scandal at that club as well over the years. Um, there has been allegations about the culture within the boardroom and within the club hierarchy. There's been some incidents over the last 20-25 years that aren't particularly pleasant. And we can go into the Coffs Harbour incident, and we can talk about the salary cap, we can talk about certain players doing things on and off the field, and to great length. Um, I don't think the club's the same now as what it was before. Um, but our City's better having two teams in them. Well, Sydney and Melbourne have got multiple professional teams in them, so that's a difficult. Brisbane has as well. Are they better? Um, it depends on the city's culture uh, and the demographics and it depends. It does depend. Bronson Sherry's only the third in a row played up an X, and their starting name was a Daniel Zuareb and Xavier Xavierson. Xavierson. I mean, that's just lazy parenting, isn't it? Really, it's like just that's fantastic though. Two X's in your name, Xavier Xavierson. Um, but no, Bronson Sherry. I mean, the fact that when he was at Cronulla and he had his breakout season, he was keeping another young player out that side, and he was cheating while doing it. That doesn't sit well with me. Um, if he was at another club, it would have still been the same result. But it had to be Cronulla. The atmosphere around Cronulla in the aftermath of the peptides, they got hammered in the media about their club culture. Um, if I'm honest, Fitzgibbons fixed a lot of that, and I think Morris was fixing it as well. Um, so there's that. Oh, Pete Peters. There's a few with the funky names. The first and the funny first name also basically. Well, Neville. There's another one. Sheffield United. Yes. The, Sheffield is a sports mad city. The history of both clubs. Bramall Lane being the oldest continuously used stadium since 1868. It's the oldest football league stadium and now Premier League stadium. Cricket, rugby league, rugby union, world internationals there. Football's had internationals. Yes. Bristol Rovers, Bristol City, absolutely. I would say yes. City's better for having two teams. Well, yeah, I think it depends on the city. Like it does depend on the city, but um, I think is it not relevant anymore? I think it's still relevant. The fans still think it's relevant. Just the teams are in different leagues at the moment. That's the only difference. When the teams are in the same league, I tell you now, that rivalry is still relevant and it's underappreciated. So that's my view on that. It just so happens Bristol City are a better team than Bristol Rovers at the moment. Not always been the case. Wednesday have had more success. Whether they're actually classed as a bigger club is different fan base, but they've had more success. But that's a cracking rivalry. One Football Alliance club, other Football League club, Foundation. Both got fantastic histories and fantastic trophy cabinets. It just so happens that Sheffield United are in a better position right now than Sheffield Wednesday. Fan bases are about the same, and they've both got a cracking set of fans. Sheffield's a sportsman city. That's my opinion. Sheffield is a sportsman city. They really are. The amount of talent that's come out of Sheffield in a variety of sports should not be understated at all. Sheffield is a fantastic city, fantastic sporting history in a variety of sports. Um, well, look, Sheffield Wednesday have had the more success and have been the top flight for longer, but without, you know, Sheffield United have Sheffield Wednesday been pushed to be more successful, and the rivalry between the two clubs is fantastic. The Steel City derby is fantastic, and it's a shame it's not a regular head-to-head in the Football League at the moment. It really is. I know Sheffield Wednesday are in the Championship for next season, Sheffield United in the Premier League for next season, but it is what it is. The Cronulla thing will always be the comments going on from the drug sheet. So they weren't the only club embroiled in that. They were just the club that had the most players embroiled in that. But it's they were the club that were the fall guys for a league-wide issue with peptides at Stephen Dank. Stephen Dank was also under hot water for being involved with Essendon. Um, and there was definitely weak governance by both the AFL and the NRL at the time in regards to drugs testing and making sure players were basically obeying the rules, and the whole thing was a shambles. Um, it just so happened that Essendon were the fall guys in the AFL and Cronulla were the fall guys in the NRL, but other clubs and other individual players were implicated. I think a lot of players got away with it. The Wednesday? Yeah, I've done my club history of both Sheffield clubs. They're on the playlist. They're on the football playlist. I've done the club histories on both those clubs, and they were fantastic to research. People forget how good these teams once were back in the day. They were very, very good sides. And yes, Sheffield Wednesday are the better of the two, but people forget how good Sheffield Wednesday were until very, very recently in their history. They were a very good side. Cronulla, they only have two players of the 17 who took the field in the 26. Yeah, they completely cleared out their roster. Flanagan was bollocks for it. The culture has drastically changed at that rugby league club. And James and Wade Graham is still there. He's the only player left from the Asada era, I think, still playing, actually. I actually think Wade Graham is the only player left from the Peptides era still playing. Although I think there might be a couple. I think Wade Graham actually is one of the few players who was playing in 2012 who's still playing now. One of the few. I think he's definitely. There might be a couple of others in the league who were playing in 2012. So yeah, it's complicated, but the culture of the team, and the fact that Gallen was the captain and Wade Graham was the vice captain in the 2016 grand final, and the fact that um, there were players in the league at the time who were at other clubs. It was just a bad period, not just for the Cronulla Sharks. The Cronulla Sharks were the fall guys, but Shandor Earl was the fall guy for the players because he got banned for 4 years. Shandor Earl was at the Penrith Panthers at the time. He was the fall guy as a player. Ben Barber, I mean, Ben Barber's career is all over the shot, isn't it? Really, with all his off-field issues. But there's a hand. I mean, that period, the late 2000s, early 2010s, Australian sport, because you had the Ben Cousins situation in the AFL that he could not fail a drugs test. Apparently, the AFL tried to drugs test him every bloody week. He always seemed to pass, and then obviously it all comes out about his antics off the field. So that period of time in Australian sporting history is not great. Shandor, I think, he was fully aware of what he did. I don't think he was. I think he was the fall guy. I think because we did at the time peptides. Now, peptides and steroids are different things. Peptides are enzymes basically, and these were manufactured to replicate things in the human body. And yeah, when you've got a sports scientist saying this is okay, and you're a young, no, I think I think Sandor at the time was a very young, naive young man who had a lot of injuries and wanted to fix his career and get playing and being fit. I think he started out at Canberra and he was at Penrith at the time that he was introduced to Stephen Dank. I think the NRL and the AFL are kind of happy that the Stephen Dank thing has gone away a little bit, and because I think there'll be more current next players who would definitely have been implicated. They just so happen to have caught Sandor, the Cronulla Sharks, and Essendon players. But I do believe it's far wider than that. And I think other clubs very quickly realised we're going to have to stop this program that we've got going with peptides And I had a few of he's been sacked by them. Shangarol was it was a bit of a he was bouncing around the league. He hadn't really established himself. Um, he drifted around the league, but I know he was a Penrith player at the time. Then he got caught up in when he was first introduced to Stephen Dank, um, and then I believe not that long ago, Stephen Dank had someone try to blow up his car with a car bomb. Like, so there's organised crime involved in this as well. And this is at the time this is going on. We've got the Melbourne Gangland War kicking off, and now we've got the Sydney Gangland War kicking off now in regards to control of the drug trade. And a part of the drug trade was anabolic steroids and smuggling these banned substances, peptides and anabolics, and obviously Melbourne at the time, where Stephen Dank was based, was in the grips of a violent drug war, gang war, which is famous, the Underbelly TV series, obviously, and obviously if you Nicola Gobbo, the lawyer, and all that, Lawyer X. So that's was having a massive impact on the Australian psyche at the time. And then just after the Melbourne Gangland War sort of quiets down, um, the Sydney gang wars have kicked off, and so there is links with organised crime there as well. Um, did I use YouTube from the start in 2005? I only got my YouTube account, and I've already got into YouTube in 2014. I got my YouTube account. I started creating content in 2017, so I didn't have an account until quite late on. I wish I had started making content earlier. I think obviously I would have made a fair bit of money out of the platform. Things could be significantly different to what they are today, but it was the right time for me to start. At the time I started making content, I think it was the right time to do it. I didn't have the confidence before, so looking at it in that regard, there was a confidence issue when I started making content. But I've only been making content since 2017, but I didn't have the confidence before then to be confident enough to do what I'm doing now. I mean, I've come a long way since 2017. The last 6 years, I've come a hell of a long way from where I was to where I am. I, a lot a lot of people have asked me about it. I think I've covered it a lot in live stream and in other videos, like when I reach milestones. I thank you very much. I don't, it's amazing how far the channel's grown. And stuff. When I did my worst behaved clubs list from '98 to now, Sydney Roosters came out on top. They've had more off-field incidents than anyone. Yeah, obviously you've got Todd Carney, Mitchell Pearce. We've had oh, not the New Zealand winger who ended up going to Newcastle, and then he ended up in the Super League. Kenny Dow. Yeah, there has been a lot of off-field. Recently, that hasn't been the case. Not since Trent Robinson's really, they've started winning under Trent Robinson. Things have calmed down. There was Victor Radley being too pissed to get on a flight. The early days of Trent Robinson, I think they were still misbehaving a lot. So there's definitely a culture issue within certain clubs and certain eras of clubs. I wouldn't say the Roosters are as misbehaving now. I think Trent Robinson's definitely cleared out a lot of the troublemakers since he's been there, and there's definitely been a culture shift within the organisation. But yeah, when Dylan Brown thing happened, Ray Hadley said, "This is why Parramatta cannot win anything. They have a bad culture." Yeah, but that's Ray Warren. Oh no, that's Ray Hadley. Sorry, that's Ray Hadley. He does like to spout crap. But the Dylan Brown thing is again a troubling situation. You've had Blake Ferguson. There's been some other players there who've done some stupid stuff. Unfortunately, when you've got a lot of young men together in a group for 10 months, year, and a lot of them like to have a drink. They're going to do some stupid stuff. Um, and unfortunately, rugby league still has, and to a certain extent, rugby union still has this drinking culture. And there's been some very high profile incidents in both codes and the AFL in Australia and across the world in rugby league and rugby union with players doing Blake Ferguson. Yeah, yeah, the coincidence of him being released and then being a div. And he claims he's Muslim, he doesn't drink, but all his incidents involve alcohol. Blake Blake Ferguson, great winger, absolute not the brightest spark in the electrical circuit. Now is he? Will sports people of the next generations be driven to achieve as much and break records like the performers? I believe so. There's always going to records are there to be broken, and I think Cameron Smith's NRL appearance record, someone could go after that. They stay fit enough, play for long enough. Um, I mean, you've got Jared Croker, who could become the second greatest points scorer in NRL history if he overtakes El Masri, and if he continues playing at the rate he's playing, and Canberra keeps scoring enough points and he keeps kicking conversions and penalties, he could do it. We've had a few though, mainly Kenny Edwards in recent times. He's a total. Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one. It's a difficult one. Player behaviour. I mean, I've given up discussing player misbehaviour when it comes to the NRL and AFL and rugby union in Australia because every off season there's always at least one player being an absolute tool. Some records are impossible to beat. Well, when Nadal got to that Grand Slam record, people said, "Oh, that's going to be hard to beat." Djokovic has got to stay, and play almost get to every Grand Slam final. He's done it. Jerry Croker could have broken Smith's record if he didn't miss all those games being exiled to reserve grade plus being injured. Oh, well, the reserve grade was getting his fitness back, he wasn't fit enough and good enough at the time. Injuries. It's only been the last 3-4 years he's had injuries. I think Croker could have done it, but he's never played Origin. I think that's the biggest travesty of his career is he's never been selected to play Origin. I think in 2016 and in 2019, I think he deserved to play Origin for New South Wales. He was playing well enough for the Raiders, and the Raiders were playing well enough. I'm surprised he didn't go call up then. But no, injuries the last couple of years have definitely hurt his numbers, but he could definitely pass El Masri for the best outside back, goal kicking back. But he's even said he's not looked at. He's the most cap raider and the highest point scorer for the Raiders of all time. You don't think anyone will ever beat St George's record scoreline? Well, the West Tigers defence. I mean, Christ. Look at some of the scores that have been pumped on the West Tigers. I think it's doable. I actually think that's doable. But you would have to nil the opposition. So obviously, 91-6, modern scoring 110-6. If you could nil the opposition, yeah, it's doable. It's doable. It would have to have a complete and utter meltdown. But I think the West Tigers, the way they're defending that, is doable. He has the most tries and points, but not caps yet. He needs another 15 games to go. Yeah, I think he can. Yeah, he hasn't got the most appearances for Canberra, but I think he can do that as well. I think Jerry Croker will be playing next season. I think Jerry Croker's playing next season. But either way, is he immortal status? He's definitely Hall of Fame status. I wouldn't say he's immortal, but Jason Croker, and they're both related, by the way. The Crokers, they are actually related, distantly, mind, but they are related. Anyone called Croker who's playing NRL is actually related to the Croker who's playing at Manly's relation as well, from the same part in South Wales. For me, I enjoyed playing in the centres. I was more of a left centre. I enjoy playing in the centres. I can't pass right as well as I can pass left. I enjoy playing in the centres for the limited rugby league games I played. Ironically, I'll be playing the same position as Jerry Kroger, but I'm a right footer playing at left centre. Weird that. Like my dad playing left back when he was a right footer. Weird. Football. Weird. Um, but I wouldn't mind playing in the centres. Um, you're less likely to get the ball in hand, but you're more likely to be involved in the game defensively. Um, so that's where I would like to play. Um, yeah, but everyone wants to be a 5'8" or a fullback or a hooker. Um, you could be very skilled to those positions. But Mitch Moses break Mitch Cronin's point scoring record. I think he could. I think he could. I think if Parramatta have a really good season next season, which I think they can, keeping players fit and having a good start, I think yes, they could. There's no saying he won't, but he's got to stay at Parramatta honestly for the rest of his career, and he's got to stay fit that whole of his next contract. Um, Wing for uni, yeah, wing for me as well. I was a bit of a winger fullback in uni because the roles are slightly different. Um, the roles are different with wingers and fullbacks. There's less, kicking for tries, and so different skill set needed. It's again, as I say, it's doable. He can score a lot of tries. That's the good thing about Mitch Moses. He can score a lot of tries. He's a good running halfback. He's got a good kicking game. He's a great all round player. Uh, Micah Sivo is a try scoring machine, but there's some other good young players that they've got in their system. And Clint Gutherson's he's not just a fullback, he can play in the centres, he can play on the wing, he can play in the halves. He's done that at various points when he's been a Parramatta, and he's a very good. He's good at coming into the line. They're both fantastic players. But Micah Sivo defensively is a bit suspect. Um, uh, but the rate Sivo scores, especially at home, is ridiculous. And Gutherson is just consistent. And they've still got a fair bit of time in their careers as well. And Parramatta really, they can play some really high stake. When Parramatta are on, they can score a lot. They are a high scoring team, but when they're having a bit of a dry spell, scoring dries up. And Aaron Ray came on with only a few minutes left, and Gutho, yeah, he could have. He could have played Origin and not touched the ball. I think he touched the ball once or twice in his 5 minutes on the field. This is where, when we come to the interchange bench, in Origin's different to a regular season bench. Oh, a new sub. Oh, well, Nico Hines did that in the grand final in 2020. Yeah, Nico Hines did that in 2020. I was in the grand final, and also nearly did that in was it game 1 or game 2? He was only on the field for like a handful of minutes. Things I'd change in rugby league. That is an interesting one. Things I'd change. I definitely, that's a difficult one. I think a lot of the rules that have been brought in, while the RLPA were consulted on the 6 again and scrum only for knock on now rather than touch. I don't know. I think I would definitely reward legs tackles more. Find a way to reward legs tackles more. Um, um, I don't know actually with potential rule changes, because there's been so many rule changes over the last 3-4 years that I think at the moment slow down on the rule changes and rule tweaks, but I would definitely look at the bunker and its remit. And yeah, I don't know. I think we need to look at more the disciplinary side of the game when it comes to facing the judiciary and length of suspension for foul play. I think we're too lenient in some of the foul play and not enough length of punishment. Because I did my longest suspensions in NRL history. I think there are some things that are happening with high shots and shoulder charges and repeat offending. I mean, we need to look at judiciary um, and making sure suspensions are correct. I don't know what I would change right now. Gutherson and Moses. I wouldn't. I don't actually. I like Mitch Moses, but sometimes their attitude towards the refs is a little bit like European football players. With I would say what I would class as almost dissent. Um, but there's no doubt on their ability as players. But yeah, I wouldn't say that the I think there's a couple more players equally as hated, if not more so. Victor Radley gets a lot of hate. There are some players that aren't well liked, even when they're not dirty. Well, yeah, that's a difficult one. Yeah, Paolo Di Canio. Paolo Di Canio, very very controversial figure, and also politically controversial as well. He's been linked to far right with some of his antics. So he's a very controversial character. Um, Controversy is never far away of Paolo Di Canio. Um, so he's a talking point. I've definitely got to do a video on Paolo Di Canio because he obviously he's pushed over the ref. Some of his celebrations linked to the far right. Yeah, Lazio, yes. One thing misconception is King Gutho nickname. He fractionally came up with the name. It was John. It was the Johnson Fiddler. Yeah, Gutherino celebration, where he does the whole Gutherino. He hasn't done that for a while because I think they were winning a game and he did the try celebration and then they lost the game. And one of the opposition players did the try celebration as he was the defender who failed to stop him and he hasn't done it for a while. Yeah, I think again, social media and the mainstream media do sometimes paint this image of players and characters within sport. Uh, I'm not from. If I was from Milan, would I be AC or Inter? I would be neither. Um, um, I was against West. He won the game, but Dane Laurie made fun of him. I think there was another incident as well where there was another game where they lost and he'd scored a try and he was doing it over the defender, and then the guy who he scored against scored against him as well, and they lost. They went on to lose the game, and he hasn't done it since because he was properly done on social media. Um, yeah, I like Atalanta when it comes to Italian football, so I'm not really an AC or Inter follower for my sins. But yeah, anyway, I'm going to sort my dinner out. I'm going to order myself Piacenza. God no, God no, no Atalanta, please Piacenza, please. Um, please, Piacenza. Didn't Piacenza go bust? I'm gonna have to look at it. I think Piacenza had to reform. Piacenza. I've not heard someone mention Piacenza as a football club for a very, very long time. We're going back a long, long time. That brings back memories of the 90s. Modena. I've actually been to Modena and Bologna a lot. So actually, which Italian clubs haven't gone bust? Christ. I'm going to have to do my more club histories over the next couple of days, and I'm going to look at when we're talking about clubs like Reading and Southend right now who are in difficulty with their finances. Then we look at Italian football like, yeah, yeah, our club struggling financially is nothing compared to the Italian and Spanish clubs going all over the place. It is bananas what happens over there. Inter is playing No, I don't think that's necessarily true. I think they got the longest unbroken streak in Serie A, but I wouldn't say that's 100% the case with Inter. Um, I don't think that's necessarily. I don't think they played every single season of their existence in Serie A. They're a founder member of Serie A, but I don't think they played their entire time. I think they've been promoted to Serie A and they've never been relegated since being in the top flight. But I wouldn't say they played their entire existence in Serie A because guess what? No club has, because Serie A was only set up in 1929. So Inter have never been relegated out the top flight since being in it. I think it's a better way to look at it because the Italian top flight was different before 1929. So and then you've got the regional divisions, so it gets complicated pre 1929. But uh, Inter, it's like Everton having the longest unbroken streak in the top flight. Well, they've never been outside Serie A, but they've never been relegated from it. But, all good things come to an end eventually. Um, but it's like Real Madrid and Barcelona and Athletic Bilbao have never been outside La Liga since its inception. That doesn't mean they've played every single season of their existence in there. But anyway, I'm going to call that a day. I'm going to sort some dinner out. I think I'm going to order myself some pizza. It's been a while since I had some takeout because I want to feed myself. It's been a very interesting discussion. Well, Italian football is corrupt. It wasn't always, but unfortunately, the last 40 odd years, that is unfortunately the case. It wasn't always the case, and it's a sorry state of affairs because it is a religion in Italy. Italians are very proud of their football clubs, and unfortunately, with how things have gone in the modern era, um, it's a very sad, sorry state of affairs, which has upset many Italians. And it's very noticeable that clubs going bust is more of a recent thing as well. This isn't something that just happened over a long period of time. This is in the last 10 to 15 or so years that Italian clubs are suddenly going bust. So there's that. Anyway, thank you very much from me for all the questions. Really appreciate it. We discussed a lot of stuff, and yeah, including pubs in Sydney, which is something that I was not expecting to be discussing, is drinking holes in Greater Western Sydney. But there we go. But anyway, thank you very much, obviously, for your questions, and I'll have some more content for you guys, obviously, very, very soon. 1, 2, 3.